Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the Strategic Forces Subcommittee hearing on assured access to space. We'll be conducting two panels today. In the first panel, we have two expert witnesses from industry who represent our current and projected near-term providers of national security space launch in the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program. In our second panel, we have three senior government officials who have responsibilities over EELV program and one advisor to the government. Testifying on panel one is Mr. Tony Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and Ms. Gwen Shotwell, President and Chief Operating Officer of Space Exploration Technologies Corporation. We appreciate you both taking the time to be here today and offer your perspectives, including the challenges and opportunities related to our national security space launch activities. In this job as chairman of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, I've come to more fully appreciate the importance of our space to our country. It's one of the underpinnings of our national security. Let me provide an example. If a foreign adversary was to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile at our country, our military would rapidly detect this missile launch through our space-based infrared system satellites, and the information would be provided to our highest national command authorities to appropriately respond. Such response would almost certainly be transmitted across space-based communication satellites to combatant commanders all over the world who would order our military forces to take action, and those troops would rely on space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities and communication capabilities to perform their mission and return home safely. These are extremely important capabilities that American lives may literally depend upon. We can't have space capabilities like this without an effective launch program. This is literally rocket science. So one of my top priorities in this job is to make sure that we have assured access to space both now and in the future. We've come a long way since the late 1990s when we went through a span of 10 months and suffered 5 launch vehicle failures. Since 2006, we've benefited from an unparalleled record of success through the Air Force partnership with United Launch Alliance, with 78 successful launches in the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program. Most recently, this partnership has also brought tremendous savings to the taxpayer, $4.4 billion according to the Air Force as a result of a 36 rocket core block buy contract. Now we are once again entering into a new phase for the EELV. We are transitioning to a more competitive environment. Many steps have been taken by the government, including Congress and the Department of Defense, to encourage this. Congress provided funding that was dedicated to new entrants for the 2 launches. SpaceX was awarded both of those contracts. And the Air Force has spent nearly $60 million and allocated more than 100 government employees to help certify SpaceX for the EELV program, which it may do in the near months ahead. We look forward to competition in the EELV program because that will achieve the best outcome for the benefit of our taxpayers and our warfighters. Lastly, it's extremely important that we work to transition off relying on Russian engines for national security launch purposes. The intention of the fiscal year 2015 NDAA was to provide a reasonable transition. Section 16808 language regarding prohibition of procuring Russian rocket engines included specific exceptions and waivers. We intended to allow the use of the Russian engines that we understood to be on contract through the period of time that we believed would allow for the development of a new U.S. engine. My understanding is the Department of Defense may not be interpreting it the same way. This remains an issue that we look forward to understanding better today. Regarding the development of a new engine, I understand this will take time. But I believe that our U.S. history, and I believe in our U.S. history, and I believe that once the men and women in the Department of Defense have the red tape eliminated, we can do this expediently, effectively, and efficiently. We should take the lowest risk approach that is in accordance with the terms of Section 1604 of the FY15 NDAA. Thank you again for being with us today regarding this important topic. I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize my friend and colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In view of the lateness of the hour, since this hearing was delayed almost 45 minutes due to votes, I ask unanimous consent that I insert my opening statement in the record.
Without objection. However, I have read his opening statement, and I fully concur with it. I could not have said it better. As he reminds me often, I couldn't have said it better. But having said that, now I recognize panel number one, Mr. Bruno, Ms. Shotwell. The witnesses are asked to summarize their prepared statements. For the record, the entire statement will be submitted, but you have 5 minutes to summarize. And Mr. Bruno, we will start with you.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. I look forward to talking about the ELV program, the future of space launch, and how I am transforming the United Launch Alliance to meet this new environment. In changing our company, I've asked our team to focus on 4 basic goals. First and foremost, to substantially reduce the cost of launch. Secondly, to move expeditiously and quickly towards an American rocket engine replacement so that we may retire the venerable and advanced technology Russian RD-180. We're going to do this while maintaining our unique capability to launch the entire suite of national security space satellites, a capability that no other provider has the technical ability to perform. And then finally, we're going to do all this without losing our laser focus on mission success, something we feel also sets us apart in this marketplace. And I'd like to say a couple of words about our path to an American rocket engine. We entered into a strategic partnership with Blue Origin late last year, a company founded by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. There were a number of reasons why that engine was attractive to us from a technology point of view, but I'll admit that first and foremost in my mind was the urgency I felt to move towards an American rocket engine. The BE-4 Blue Origin engine is 3 years into its development path and offered the most expeditious track to an American engine replacement. It is a methane engine and offers novel technology and advanced manufacturing techniques that promise to substantially reduce cost. But as a person who has done rocket development for 30 years, I can tell you that it is difficult, and rocket engines are the hardest part. And the history of rocket engine development is common with the occurrence of technical challenges and those that often affect schedule. So prudence required that I have a backup plan. So we have also entered into a partnership with Aerojet Rocketdyne for their AR-1 engine with a more conventional kerosene-based fuel. You could argue that the technical risk of that approach is lower because the fuel is more common in the industry. However, that engine is 1 to 2 years behind the Blue Origin engine. And so we will continue both of these until we down select in about the 2016-2017 timeframe when sufficient testing data has been available for us to make an informed decision. I have gone to my board of directors and asked for this to be funded privately so that we can move out smartly and do both of these activities. Now, we will place this engine underneath a next generation of launch vehicles that will continue to provide that complete support to all of the national security space satellites, to all of their intended orbits. But we will also expand our performance capability so that we are able to meet the challenges that might arise in the future as the country finds new needs to be coped with in space. I will also substantially reduce the cost of our infrastructure by streamlining our product line and streamlining our facilities and our other launch infrastructure. So today we maintain a fleet of 16 different rockets. Other providers may have a single rocket or 2 rockets. We fly 16 variants in order to cover that entire span of national security space requirements. But within that fleet of 16, there are 2 redundant systems. The Delta IV medium class is entirely redundant to the Atlas V class in terms of its performance. We have maintained these 2 systems all this time in order to satisfy the country's need for assured access, which is to say 2 independent systems so that in the event that there might be a failure or a flaw in one system, there would still be a second system able to launch our critical national security assets. In this new environment where the policy has changed to assure access through the existence of 2 providers, I will now retire the Delta medium class of space launch vehicles when we have completed our current requirements within the manifest. And that team and that infrastructure will be consolidated into Atlas, creating considerable savings to our offerings. I will also consolidate our pads Today we have 5 launch pads to support this work. We are going to consolidate to 2 pads, one in each coast. We're going to do that by bringing in innovative designs to the pads that will allow them to be mission agnostic, flexible, and handle the volume of lift that is currently requiring 5. And we're going to revolutionize the way people come to us to purchase launch services. We're going to introduce a standard launch offering, fixed priced, priced in advance, that customers can buy, and then add to that, if they desire, standard options, also at a pre-priced. It will literally be like going to a website and building your own rocket. It will completely change the way launch services are purchased. And together with all of these changes and innovations, we will substantially reduce the price of launch from where it is today. I'd also like to say a couple of words about reliability. We enjoy an unprecedented perfect mission success record of 94 consecutive flights, all of which on time, and by the way, all of which were on or under budget. This is a record no one has yet to match, and from our perspective, when you are launching national security missions, some of which are multi-billion-dollar, one-of-a-kind assets upon which lives depend, reliability matters. And so in this environment, I am very excited about the changes in our industry. Competition is now possible. I believe competition is good for the taxpayer. I believe it is healthy for the industry, and I'm looking forward to taking that field and putting my team there because I'm confident that we can win.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shotwell, thanks for being here. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee today. In addition to my opening statement, I have prepared a detailed written statement which I've submitted for the record. Mr. Chairman, every day I go to work with the best and the brightest engineers, technicians, and support staff in the world, over 4,000 of them now, and I can tell you that they are prepared to support our nation's most critical launches. Those who say that U.S. engineers can't compete or that continued foreign reliance is the only way forward are wrong. The SpaceX mission from day one has been to leverage American innovation and technical know-how to provide the most reliable space launch systems in history. We seek to serve the nation by offering these systems for national security launches. To date, the SpaceX Falcon 9 launch vehicle has flown successfully 16 consecutive times for a sophisticated array of U.S. government and commercial customers, including the Air Force. I'm highly confident that the Falcon 9 will be certified for the Air Force's EELV class missions by June of this year. Later this year, we intend to fly the Falcon Heavy, which will double the lift capability of any rocket currently flying. We believe that this vehicle, which has a great commonality with the current Falcon 9, can be certified in relatively short order. The subcommittee's hearing today on assured access is timely. National policy law rightly calls for 2 completely independent launch systems that can lift the full spectrum of national security payloads. Due to the common upper stage engines flown between Atlas and Delta, Russian reliance, and only 1 heavy lift rocket, we do not have assured access today. Even without assured access, the cost of the EELV program has become unsustainable. According to the GAO, the price per EELV launch has quadrupled from $100 to nearly $400 million. But I want to focus my testimony today on what I believe to be constructive solutions to achieve assured access. First, the United States does not need more Russian engines to get national security space payloads to orbit, with the Falcon 9 and the Delta, both all-American rockets, available. The notion of a capability gap is just not true. It's noteworthy that the head of Russia's space enterprise, Dmitry Rogozin, has publicly stated that funds received from the United States for the RD-180 is free money that goes to the Russian missile program. How do we justify buying more and funding the Russian military? Second, continue to pursue a policy of assured access through genuine competition between multiple qualified providers with redundant, truly dissimilar launch vehicle systems. Third, eliminate the costly, inefficient, and ineffective launch capabilities contract to the incumbent. In the meantime, these subsidies must be accounted for if you're to have true and real competition. Finally, Congress can structure engine development efforts to maximize smart investment. Government money is best spent against unique government mission requirements that otherwise would not be developed by a commercial provider. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. As a nation, we stand on the cusp of having real competition for national security space launches. SpaceX, with our all-American Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, looks forward to contributing to the nation's assured access to space. I'm pleased to address any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you both. Again, I know it takes a lot of time to prepare for these things, so I appreciate y'all putting the time in and being here. This is a very important subject. But let me start with a little housekeeping. Ms. Shotwell, I understand that you requested an extension to fully respond to the requirement of the disclosure of contracts with foreign governments as required under House rules. Do I have your commitment to provide the required disclosure, which is posted publicly per House rules no later than 7 days after the March hearing? To be clear, that would be the close of business on the 24th of March.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next off, quick question for both of you. Do you have any concern from your perspective with allowing this committee to have access to the terms of the recent settlement agreement regarding SpaceX lawsuit against the U.S. government?
I have no concern about the recent.
About us having access to the terms of that agreement?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. The terms of that agreement are basically governed by the court, and so we have no say whatsoever.
Well, I understand that the court's saying that it's a secret settlement. I want to know if y'all would object if the court let us see that.
I don't object. I'm sorry now.
Mr. Bruno.
We have no objection at all.
Thank you both. New topic. Ms. Shotwell, tell us why it is important to have competition for the EELV vehicle program.
Competition drives prices. Importantly, it drives quality of service as well. If you're truly competing against a real competitor, you're going to ensure that you have a quality product, you have a quality service at the best possible price.
Okay. Mr. Bruno, same question.
Competition, when it is possible, is universally good for the taxpayer, it's healthy for the industry, drives innovation, and it drives value to cost.
All right, Ms. Shotwell, how do you feel about competing against ULA? Do you think that SpaceX can win a free and fair competition with ULA?
Absolutely, I do.
Great. Mr. Bruno, how do you feel about competing against SpaceX? Do you think you can win a free and fair competition?
Absolutely.
All right. All right, so we both agree. Mr. Bruno, what is the impact of Section 1608 from the fiscal year 2015 NDA based on the most current interpretation of the DoD?
Certainly. So the most current interpretation limits us to engines that we had on hand prior to the outbreak of Crimea. The impact of that is that we will be unable to introduce the new American rocket engine before those engines are consumed. We will have no more than 5 that we are able to use beyond our existing 36-core block buy. That means there will be a capability gap between when we are out of engines on Atlas and can no longer fly Atlas and when we have the earliest opportunity to introduce an American engine.
And what will that mean for your ability to compete? Because y'all both really want to compete with each other. I just heard you say it.
Yes, we do. So the reason we're retiring the Delta IV medium class is because it is inherently 25 to 30% more expensive than the Atlas. It is not competitive in the marketplace. So without access to the Atlas rocket, we are essentially unable to compete in that time frame.
Okay. To provide another perspective, Ms. Katrina McFarland, who is testifying on the second panel today, offered the Department of Defense her view of the statement for the record. Quote, even assuming a new entrant is certified in the near term, which we expect you to be, the Department is concerned that with the loss of the Atlas V and the medium intermediate class Delta IV vehicle, we could be faced with a multi-year gap without at least 2 price competitive launch providers servicing medium to intermediate class missions. Ms. Shotwell, that's close quote. Ms. Shotwell, the Department is saying we may be faced with this multi-year gap in competition. Do you still agree that competition is important?
Yes, sir, I do, but there's many ways to achieve competition. There's also many ways to make vehicles cost-effective. When we produce more Falcon 9s, the vehicle cost decreases. If you were to increase the number of Delta vehicles that you produce every year, the price of the Delta would come down. Certainly the cost of the Delta would come down.
But do you think the Delta single can compete with SpaceX on the price?
I believe it would take work on the part of ULA, but I believe that's their job.
That's interesting. Say what? You want to respond to that?
Certainly. So today we fly Atlas about twice as often as we fly Delta. When I said a moment ago that Delta was about 25 to 30% more expensive than Atlas, that was adjusting for flying an all Delta fleet. And I'd also like to point out that ULA has consistently reduced cost from the beginning of the formation of the company in the ELV program through today. Prior to the formation of ULA, the price of lift had risen dramatically due to the collapse of the commercial telecom industry, and the average price of lift was then, in fact, $400 million each. As we entered into our block buy, ULA had driven that cost down to more like $200 million. And of course, our goal is to eventually drive that price to 100 or below, so cutting it in half again.
Okay, before I stop, I want to go to what Ms. McFarland just described as this potential gap of time when we won't have access, particularly on the heavy lift, because I understand that SpaceX is close to being certified on these medium and intermediate range missions, but you still have a way before you test on the heavy lift. And Mr. Bruno is saying without the RD-180, he would not be able to continue to compete for the intermediate and medium range missions, which could then jeopardize his ability to maintain the Delta Heavy. Do you agree, and I'll start with you, Ms. Shotwell, do you agree that there is the potential, as outlined by Ms. McFarland, that there could be a multi-year period where we would not have assured access to space for the heavy NRO platforms?
I think it's important to note that the Atlas does not have a heavy configuration and that the heaviest NRO satellites must fly on the Delta IV Heavy, which is of the Delta line.
Exactly, and Mr. Bruno has made the statements that without the Atlas, which is his workhorse mission that needs the RD-180, he would not be able to maintain the infrastructure that supports the heavy lift Delta IV, which only lifts about once every 2 years, and would make it cost prohibitive, so it wouldn't be in the market. Now, this is his argument, not mine. Do you agree that that could create the potential that we would not have heavy lift capability for the NRO platforms for a 2 to 3 year period, or 2 to 5 year period, as Ms. McFarland from the DoD has said?
So obviously I don't understand the intricacies of the ULA business. However, I do see the Delta IV vehicle flying successfully, the Delta Heavy vehicle flying successfully. And so with a Falcon 9 single core, which is comparable to a Delta IV, and then the Falcon Heavy, which we will bring online and be certified in time for competition in 2018, then you have two completely independent, dissimilar vehicle families, both from medium lift all the way through heavy lift.
Okay. With that, thank you very much. I yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for calling this hearing, and I want to welcome witnesses from two outstanding companies. I think the taxpayer has reason to be reassured because we've come a long way toward competition, toward higher quality and better price for the taxpayer. It was heartening for me to hear Mr. Bruno's comments because I think you're talking about a very different company than ULA was even just a few years ago, as you try to transform it to a more commercial model with fixed pricing and things like that. I think competition led by SpaceX is having a very good effect. But we all are worried about the lack of assured access to space and this window of vulnerability that we may or may not be facing. And I think it's important to be aware of that risk, but not exaggerate it. To my knowledge, there's not a backup for Marine One helicopter for the President or for Air Force One. They both rely on similar technologies, and it's worked pretty darn well. The ULA launch record is outstanding, as is SpaceX's. So, as I say, the taxpayer has a lot to be proud of. But as we transition toward real competition, though, a lot of ways of doing business have to change. And the ELC payment that ULA has been getting for a long time, almost $1 billion a year, that would have to go away in a truly competitive environment, wouldn't it, Mr. Bruno?
No, it doesn't go away. The capability contract is generally misunderstood, so let me clarify exactly what it is. They are costs that all providers have. The capability contract pays for pads, laboratories, day of launch operations, and the infrastructure that supports all of that. It is simply a contracting choice that the Air Force has made. Other providers receive these same costs. NASA contracts them in a single contract. The Air Force has chosen to break out into 2 contracts. The reason they have done that is because the current set of satellites currently on orbit that are now being replaced by the launches in the block buy are generally exceeding their design life. And so there is tremendous urgency to replace those as quickly as possible. The replacement satellites, however, are often experiencing schedule challenges and delays. And so it is imperative that even though we don't necessarily know which satellite is going to show up to the pad that when they do, they can be promptly lifted. And so the Air Force decided to break out those launch infrastructure and launch day costs into a separate contract to ensure that we had the flexibility to do just exactly that. And in fact, it enables us, together with the block buy of 36, to set up an environment where we have essentially planned every launch in 3s. So if we are targeting a given date and a given rocket for a spacecraft, we've identified a rocket ahead of time and a rocket behind that spacecraft could move to, should it be early or late. We have in fact exercised that slot manifesting technique 6 times last year in total transparency to the manifest and the Air Force without delay. These are costs that everyone has. They are simply contracted differently in EELV.
So are you saying that the other company, SpaceX, benefits just as much as ULA does from the $1 billion of ELC expenditures every year?
What I'm saying is SpaceX has those same costs. They're folded into a single contract when they do business with NASA, just like they are with me. And in fact, I should have also mentioned that when we do fly a mission outside the block buy contract, we in fact reimburse the Air Force a substantial fee for that infrastructure they have supported for each and every launch.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree, Ms. Shotwell, with what Mr. Bruno is saying?
I don't agree completely, no. I don't agree with the term substantial reimbursement of costs. In fact, if you were to take the $1 billion a year that they get and spread that over the average 8 to 10 missions they do per year, that's $100 to $125 million per launch. It's my understanding that the payback, and I don't have his contract, I don't have access to his contract, is substantially less than that, possibly on the order of 10 or 15% of that cost.
Mm-hmm. A number of other members are here, so I'll just end with this final observation. Washington is fortunate to have a patriotic philanthropist, David Rubenstein, who even paid personally to repair the Washington Monument. I think the country is lucky to have amazing entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who for some reason, unknown to me, both want to participate in some of the boldest new technologies in space. So we're fortunate that they're choosing to spend their money in that fashion. Not that these companies don't have many other backers, but that's a remarkable development for this country, and I'm proud of their entrepreneurial drive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member, the chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Shotwell, if I could ask you a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for being here and the expertise that you bring. The chairman did, as is customary, invite Mr. Musk, as head of the company, to be here. So the questions I actually have are for him, but since he decided not to be here and managed a schedule to be with us, let me ask you the question since you are representing him. I was reading in Space News an article in January that was entitled, Musk Questions Integrity of the U.S. Air Force Certification Process. The quote he gave in the article was, "The people fighting it," meaning the Falcon 9 certification, "are really in the bureaucracy of the Pentagon and the procurement officers, who then go and work at Boeing and Lockheed Martin, the prime contractors, which has actually happened. It's easy to understand from a game theory standpoint, especially when you're asking them to award a contract to a company where they're probably not going to get a job against a company where their friends are. So they've got to go against their friends and their future retirement program. This is a difficult thing to expect. Now, I don't necessarily presuppose that these are your opinions anyway as well, but the head of SpaceX, which is your company, appears to believe that some of the people who are in service in the Air Force and Department of Defense, many career employees, may be holding back on certification because they have friends somewhere else and they want to work there later. So I'd please ask you if you could explain this statement to me, because while Mr. Musk may find it easy to understand, I frankly find it very troubling.
I appreciate the question. Mr. Musk had a concern about a particular procurement officer and his choice of job after leaving service. And I'm sure if there was any evidence that led to there actually being some issues with that particular choice of job, that this committee would have investigated and cleared it up. However, I do want to state that the relationship with the Air Force and SpaceX has been extremely good. We've been working shoulder to shoulder on the certification process. It was a little slow to get going last year, but by November, December timeframe, we were operating at an incredible pace, and we just couldn't get it done by December. But I anticipate certification of the Falcon 9 launch vehicle upcoming here shortly.
So what you're telling me is that you do no longer believe that the people who may have slowed the certification process are doing it simply for they're looking out for their own retirement and because they're going against friends. Does that reflect, that no longer reflects the attitude of the company or Mr. Musk?
What I'm saying is his particular concern doesn't seem to have been borne out. He was just raising a concern.
It's a rather damning kind of concern to put in public, isn't it? Let me also ask another thing, because I appreciate your insistence on competition, but I understand NASA is ready to award SpaceX 3 additional cargo delivery missions to the International Space Station. I am assuming you support NASA's decision in this regard.
Yes, sir.
But those are sole source awards without competition. So do you think it's okay for NASA to award those 3 missions as a sole source without having open competition?
Congressman, actually, there was a competition, and SpaceX and Orbital Sciences.
For these new 3 cargo missions that to which I'm referring.
So the competition for the cargo resupply missions included pricing for out-year missions, and so fundamentally, when we initially competed for the initial CRS awards, there were prices for out-year missions. So NASA has the ability to look at Orbital's prices, has the ability to look at SpaceX prices.
And you don't see a distinction between between those approaches then?
No, we competed and we won.
You've also said a couple of times here as well that Falcon 9 is an all-American launch vehicle. The overwhelming material used is aluminum. From what company do you get that aluminum?
We buy the aluminum from Constellium.
Is that an American company?
No, it's not.
So you've also said, or at least one of your senior engineers has said, that most of the avionics is designed and manufactured and tested in America. Does that mean you have some avionics that are foreign-made as well?
We have one particular box, a GPS receiver. All American is by percentage, and this vehicle is 99% American.
There's a statute in California that would not allow that to be advertised as all American, you know.
I'm unaware of that.
Okay, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman chair, and I recognize Mr. Takai for 5 minutes for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bruno, United Launch Alliance has a very impressive launch success, and I just wanted to thank you and your employees and commend you for this success. This hearing concerns the matter of assured access to space, and the national policy and law requires 2 separate vehicle systems that can be executed 100%, that can execute 100% of the national security launch requirements. What do you suggest we do to fulfill this legal requirement?
So the current policy for assured access to space has moved from maintaining 2 launch systems with a single company to achieving 2 launch systems in a competitive environment across 2 providers or more than 2 providers. That's allowing for competition. I think that is a wise and a healthy change in the policy now that that is possible. the best way to achieve its ends is to ensure a fair and even playing field in which both companies are able to compete effectively.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shotwell, SpaceX has said that it can provide launches for DoD payloads at about 75% price reduction. I heard a little bit different reduction today from what is currently being charged on the average per flight. How have you been able to achieve this savings?
So I'm not quite sure where you got that percentage.
Yeah, so what is the correct percentage? I've been hearing
Compared to
the
my price compared to
your competitor.
Mr. Bruno.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously, I don't have access to what Mr. Bruno charges per launch. However, he did receive a block buy for 28 missions for $11 billion. So that, to me, sounds like about $400 million per mission. And I believe the GAO has found price per launch of about those numbers. So if the average price for a ULA mission is $400 million, the average price for a SpaceX Falcon 9 launch, commercial, is $60 million. The government buys launch slightly differently from my commercial customers, and they add requirements and additional technical. So I would say an average price to the DoD for a Falcon 9 launch would be on the order of $80 to $90 million. Now, to be fair, my Falcon Heavy is more expensive than the single-core Falcon 9. The average price for a Falcon Heavy to the U.S. government would be on the order of $150 to $160 million. So an overall average price to the U.S. government, if I were to split heavies with single-core Falcon 9s, on the order of $120 or so million per flight. So from that math, I see that my prices are 25% of what the ULA prices are.
Okay, so my question is, how are you able to achieve that type of savings?
It's hard for me to say. I don't know how to build a $400 million rocket. So the more difficult question would be, instead of how am I less expensive than ULA, I don't understand how ULA is as expensive as they are. The next most expensive launch vehicle is the Ariane 5, produced by Europe. And though they have brilliant technology and fine engineers, it's not a particularly efficient economy. And the Ariane 5, which enjoys a similar success record, approximately similar success record, is about half the cost of a ULA launch.
Okay, and for my final question, you note in your statement that SpaceX designs and builds all of its own rockets in California, yet most of the other rocket engines that currently support our other rockets are built in other countries, say Russia. Why did you choose to make your engines in the United States, and what are some of the national security advantages of an all-American supply chain?
So SpaceX did not start out thinking that we would build the majority of this rocket ourselves, and we do actually build the majority of this rocket. We build our tanks, we build our engines, we write our software, we build our launch sites, we write our ground control software, we build our fairings. So we build this rocket in the United States. Granted, there might be some raw materials purchased elsewhere, but this is an American rocket built by American hands and technicians. And though we didn't necessarily start out that way, there were a number of critical technologies that we would not allow another company to build for us, and that was propulsion technology. We needed to own it because it's a critical part. It drives the vehicle design, and it can drive schedule as well. So though Mr. President Putin might be supplying RD-180s right now, that is not a guaranteed supply chain to ULA, even if the ban on RD-180s were to, additional RD-180s were to move forward. How do you know that he isn't going to pull the supply chain of those engines? As a matter of fact, Dmitry Rogozin did threaten to do that. So we found it critically important. Propulsion is critically important to the vehicle, and we felt that we, SpaceX, had to build that engine ourselves.
Gentleman's time's expired. I thank the gentlelady for her answer. Now that Mr. Lamborn is back, he is recognized for 5 minutes for the next series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Shotwell, I'm aware that your company is concerned that the EELV launch capability contract will provide possibly an unfair advantage to your competitor, ULA. But like ULA, your company does have other government contracts. In fact, your company receives money from NASA for the Falcon 9 version 1.1, I believe.
We have a contract with NASA to fly that, yes.
And just real quickly, as I go along here, what would be the amount of that contract?
The contract for the Jason 3 mission this summer, I believe, was $63 million.
And that's your only contract with NASA?
We just received a contract for NASA to launch the test payload in 2017 or 2018, and I actually don't know the value of that contract. I'm guessing, and I will follow up with the committee, on the order of $75 million for that. In addition, I do have a contract with NASA for cargo resupply, which is Falcon 9 and the Dragon spacecraft missions, to serve the International Space Station with cargo both up and down.
And how much is that for?
It was $1.6 billion initially for 12 flights, and we were recently awarded 3 additional missions on the average of about $150 million per mission.
Okay, so with that in mind, and just to put everything in context, how do we define fairness? And I'd like to hear from each of you on that. I mean, obviously, it sounds like you both are doing a great job of getting the applicable agencies to trust you to provide certain goods and services.
I appreciate the question, actually. This is a very important topic. So ULA, through the ELC, the ELV Launch Capabilities Contract, receives this amount of money every year, whether they launch or not. Their fixed costs are covered. My fixed costs are only covered because of what I charge on a per mission basis. So if I'm not launching, my fixed costs are not covered. So they're very different mechanisms to contract. With no competition, which ULA has enjoyed since 2006, it doesn't matter whether you have a part that's firm fixed price and a part that's not firm fixed price, that's cost plus. But when there is competition, they can sell their launch vehicles for the marginal cost of that launch vehicle because their fixed costs are already paid for by the Department of Defense.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bruno, how would you respond to that question?
Certainly, but first I think I have to untangle some of the numbers we just heard to make the context of the answer clear. So we in fact do not charge $400 million for an average lift. Our Atlas 401, which is roughly equivalent to a Falcon 9.1 within the block buy, costs $164 million on average for a launch service. We have an entire fleet of launch vehicles, unlike other providers that fly essentially one bird. The average lift of all of that within our 36 core block buy is $225 million. This is a 30% reduction as we entered into the block buy than from prior years, as we have been working our costs down. In fact, the most recent GAO report recognized the $4.4 billion that the block buy and ELC contracts saved the government. Within the recent cycle of better buying power practices, this is fully 1/4 of all of the savings achieved by the department. So there is a consistent trajectory of reduced costs. 400 is not a number that I recognize. These are the actual numbers. At the end of the block buy, the price of that 401, which is equivalent to a Falcon 9.1, will be more like $140 million for the next incremental buy. The Delta Heavy is a different class of vehicle than the Falcon Heavy will be. One of the things that we have as a technical capability that other providers do not have is a high energy upper stage. So while performance may be roughly equivalent to LEO, to the most challenging orbits, the geosynchronous orbit, and the high elliptical orbits, there is still a performance delta that I urge the government to be considerate of as we make sure we have competition for the entire spectrum of national security lifts. Let me also explain the RD-180. We have an RD-180 underneath the Atlas because the government asked us to. At the end of the Cold War, there was significant concern about Soviet rocket scientists ending up in places like North Korea. And so we were asked to find cooperative opportunities to keep those people employed in a productive way. Additionally, the RD-180 represents advanced technology in rocket engines that did not exist in the United States then and still does not exist today. That technology will come to the United States when we develop our new American rocket engines. It constitutes a significantly higher performance and an advancement of the technology. That's why... Oh,
Gentleman's time expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez, for 5 minutes for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The more I learn, the more confused I get. I just would mention that I was at a few years ago, I was over with the French counterpart of these two companies, and they were telling me that their launch costs about $200 million equivalent, and they said they weren't worried about UAL, but could I get rid of SpaceX because they were going to drive them out of business. So I see why we have two kind of a confrontation going on here. Mr. Bruno, I understand the reason that you have given for the use of the Russian RD-180 engine. I'm one of those persons that works consistently in NATO and is very worried about what is happening with Russia, and I think that it's high time that we develop our own engine here, or have it, or in the case of SpaceX, I guess we've developed it. Somebody told me that it was going to be $1 or $2 billion additional government monies invested into building this new engine. Is that around the right realm?
No, that's not correct. Let me help to explain. So the typical cost of developing a new liquid rocket engine is in fact around $1 billion, with somewhat more money to incorporate it into a rocket. The American rocket engine that we have embarked upon with Blue Origin, and also our backup with Aerojet Rocketdyne, is largely privately funded. In fact,
so
Blue is
the
entirely.
United States isn't putting very much money into developing this? Because I'm being told by my staff that General Mitchell said it's about $1.5 billion that the government is investing into this engine development. Is that true?
Not yet.
I don't want to get caught up, but is that true or false?
That's false.
Okay, so I'll have to go back to General Mitchell then to see why he said that. Then I'm getting, well, let me go to Ms. Shotwell for a minute, then I might come back to you, Mr. Bruno. I'm just trying to understand this. I have been very interested in having competition in new entrant certification process for a long time. And I understand the major requirement for new entrant certification was that you perform 3 launches successfully. Am I correct about that?
That is correct.
Now, SpaceX, I believe, completed those by January 6th of last year, of 2014. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And since then, you've completed a total of 11 more consecutive successful launches with the Falcon 9 rocket. So is your sense that your rocket has demonstrated reliability?
Absolutely. The Falcon 9 has demonstrated incredible reliability. We are 100% primary mission success with the earlier version of Falcon 9 as well as this upgraded version of Falcon 9. I want to clarify a little bit. The path that we chose for certification required 3 flights plus data plus engineering review boards, which are basically design reviews of every subsystem, plus audits of our launch site, our quality system, our management systems, and our systems engineering. So I just wanted to be clear that it was more than just the 3 flights. It was the 3 flights plus all the additional activity.
But it's pretty much the same rocket each time? So you've
Largely the same
reliability?
rocket. We don't fly a fairing when we fly a Dragon capsule to the International Space Station, but it's fundamentally the same first stage, with the exception of recoverability and reusability pieces, but it's fundamentally the same first stage.
Okay. So then I understand that ULA has about 14 different configurations of the vehicle. So can you tell us, have all of these flown more than 3 times to demonstrate reliability? Mr. Bruno.
No, they have not all flown more than 3 times. So we have 16 configurations, 10 for the Atlas, 4 for the Delta IV, and 1 for the Delta II. And the number of flights across that family is varied. And I don't, off the top of my head, have the exact score
much
for
of each went.
one, but I will submit that for the record.
That would be great. I would appreciate that. Okay, for right now, that's the questions that I have. I have a lot more after everything you said, but maybe somebody else will get to them. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, with all these questions, there's often going to be some degree of overlap. Mr. Bruno, how many launches has ULA done?
94.
How many has it tried?
94.
100% success record?
Yes.
As you've noticed in the media over the last couple of years with respect to various launch efforts by various companies, there have been failures. If there were a failure of the kind of launch that ULA does, what is the cost? What is the damage, the loss?
Typically, it would be in the billions. So launch is on average 10 to 15% of the life cycle cost of a national security space mission.
You said how much in millions?
Billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars for one lost launch?
Yes.
Ms. Shotwell, last year, Mr. Elon Musk testified to the Senate Appropriations Committee that, quote, no competition will be fair, full, and open so long as the Air Force continues to utilize contract line items to fuel ULA's fixed cost to maintain its launch capability, end quote. As you are aware, the Air Force currently has the EELV Launch Capability, ELC, contract in place to meet government requirements. As I understand the situation, the Air Force plans for competition later this year. Do you think these competitions will be fair or unfair, and why?
Well, it depends on how the Air Force decides to determine how much of the ELC should be allocated to any competed mission. I can't say in advance of reading the request for proposal, but I do anticipate a draft in the next month or so.
Mr. Bruno, do you have an opinion?
I do. I have greater faith in the Air Force Acquisition Corps than my counterpart at SpaceX. I am convinced that they will find a way to create a level and even playing field and create real competition.
All right. Next question. Ms. Shotwell, the Air Force has told us that whoever wins a competition will get a portion of the EELC funding. If SpaceX wins, my understanding is that you will get a portion of that planned funding. Is this correct, and is that fair or unfair?
That's not my understanding at all. We have never sought nor accepted ELC funding.
Okay.
I hope I understand your question.
Well, I'm reading it as written, so that's the best I can do right now.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Bruno, is the EELC contract a subsidy, as SpaceX often refers to it? Please describe the role of this contract.
No, it is not a subsidy. It is, as I have said before, it covers costs that all launch providers have: pads, labs, day of launch operations, fuel and propellants, the infrastructure that supports them. The Air Force has simply chosen to contract for that separately from the production element.
Okay, Ms. Shotwell, I'm going to give another shot at a different question, but please bear in mind that each of us congressmen have staff, both committee and office, that put these things together to assist us, so hopefully this one you'll be better able to follow. Quote, Ms. Shotwell, I'm aware that SpaceX was surprised that its Falcon 9 version 1.1 was not certified by the Air Force at the end of 2014, despite the fact that weekly teleconferences were conducted by senior SpaceX leadership such as yourself or Mr. Musk with Lieutenant General Sam Greaves of the Air Force Space and Missile Center. Were all the elements of the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement that was signed by the Air Force and SpaceX completed by the end of 2014?
Before I answer the question, I do want to note that SpaceX and the Air Force are working very closely. They're working very hard, and we are working very hard, shoulder to shoulder, to get this vehicle certified to help fix this assured access to space issue. So let's make sure that that's very clear. The surprise that we had in December was that the mode that we were operating in with respect to dealing with open items, it looked like we were going to be able to resolve open items after certification, some open items after certification. I think the Air Force believed in December that, that they did not want to certify with any open items, and so kind of the practice that we had been following basically did not bear out. However, we have a great understanding with the Air Force right now. We continue to work on certification. And I'd like to be clear, the certification process that we're undergoing right now, which SpaceX is going through, we're not being paid by the Air Force to go through, and ULA had a very different and a much easier certification process when they were new with their rockets. However, so we're working very closely with the Air Force on the certification, and the certification fundamentally addresses all the issues that one would address right up until a flight readiness review, which occurs just a week or so before launch. So not only are we, by going through the certification process, being certified as a provider or maybe even the launch vehicle design, but fundamentally we're being certified as if we were going to be flying in a week or two. And normally when you do an Air Force contract, you receive a contract and then you fly that mission 2 or 3 years later. So it's all I'm trying to say is an incredibly rigorous certification process.
I see my time has expired. Let me conclude with this one remark. Mr. Bruno, United Launch Alliance, thank you for your perfect record in servicing our country. And Ms. Shotwell and SpaceX, thank you for your willingness, your company's willingness to engage in a very risky endeavor in space.
Thank you, the gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman, Mr. Bridenstine, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bruno, just a question regarding the Delta retirement process. Do you have a timeline for that?
Yes, I expect to retire it in the 2018 to 2019 timeframe after we have accomplished the commitments we already have.
So, when you think about the limitation on the RD-180, how does that affect your calculus on when to retire the Delta program? Because ultimately, you know, if there's going to be a competition, you'll need the Delta program beyond 2018, 2019.
Delta is inherently more expensive than Atlas and is simply not competitive in an open marketplace.
And I'm just out of curiosity, when there is this limitation out there and the limitation is waiverable, and there may be maybe uncertainty based on that, how does this affect you as a company trying to make capital expenditures and plan for the future? Does it change the way you do business?
It does. The investment for our new American rocket engine and our next generation launch system will largely be private. Private investment does not like uncertainty, and so this issue around 1608 and the availability of the RD-180 is making it difficult for us to close with our investors on that arrangement.
You mentioned that the Delta IV Heavy has a different capability from the Falcon Heavy. So how is that relevant if it's going to be retired after 2018, 2019?
I will maintain the Delta IV Heavy as long as the NRO requires it. I've made that commitment to the NRO and to the Air Force. When we have the final version of our next generation launch system, it will in fact have 30% more capability than the Delta Heavy has today, and at a substantially lower cost. At that point, I expect the Air Force and the NRO will find a graceful path to migrate to that platform.
You mentioned that the BE-4 engine is methane and that the AR-1 engine is kerosene. My understanding is when you build a new rocket or you build a new engine or you have a new engine, you need to build an entirely new rocket around that engine. What are the engineering implications of which direction you end up going? Is there a difference in time frame and those kind of things?
There is a difference in time frame, but it is primarily because the methane engine started 3 years earlier than the kerosene engine did. Methane is a lower density fuel, and so the tanks on the first stage would need to be larger. The kerosene engine we're developing will also be longer in length and have different interfaces, so for both there will be pad changes that need to be made as well.
And do you expect, when do you expect the next generation rocket to be ready for testing and ultimately usability?
If all goes as planned, we would have the next generation rocket first flying no earlier than 2019, which would support a certification in 22 or 23.
Okay. And for both of you, could you give me an estimate, what percentage of your launches are driven by the private sector, commercial enterprise, the satellite industry, for example, commercial telecommunication satellites? And not just telecommunication, weather, whatever satellites there may be. What percentage is from commercial?
60% of SpaceX launches are commercial.
Okay.
Just under 20% for us today.
Is there a reason that it's about 20% and not more, not higher?
Our primary core market and mission has been for national security space.
Okay. And then the final question for both of you would be, I've got about 55 seconds left, so you guys can divide that among yourselves. As far as infrastructure requirements, both of you are going to need infrastructure for launch capabilities. Can you share with this panel what those requirements might be as we think about the future?
As a responsible launch service provider, we basically build our own launch pads, we maintain our own launch pads, we maintain all our infrastructure, and all of the costs of that are rolled into the per mission price for each launch. So it's covered.
Okay.
Ditto.
Roger that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to ask some cleanup questions, and we'll dismiss this panel. And trust me, I could keep y'all here for 2 hours talking about the stuff on my mind. You just mentioned that you would keep the Delta Heavy in place as long as that the NRO requires or the government requires. But you've also said publicly, and I want to go back to the RD-180 and the problems it generates, that if we don't fix the 1608 language problem in the NDAA 15 budget, that you may not be able to compete for some of the missions upcoming, and then the Delta program may go away. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
All right. And before I go any further, let me ask Ms. Shotwell this. He's already talked about getting rid of the Delta IV. If he were to stop the Delta IV, are there any missions that it carries out that you could not carry out?
No, Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy could carry out all the missions.
Anything that the Delta IV does?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, the comment that the Falcon Heavy is less capable than the Delta IV Heavy is patently untrue.
Yeah. Well, my point is, so we would go from him having a monopoly to you having a monopoly if he stops with the Delta IV. Is there anybody else that can compete with you for those missions?
I don't understand why ULA can't focus and determine how to make the Delta IV more competitive.
Let's one thing at a time. If he stops the Delta IV rocket launches, is there anybody else that can, and you've already said you can do anything it can do, is there anybody else that can compete with you for those missions?
I've not seen Delta IV prices, so if they stop Delta IV, I guess we would compete with the Atlas, hopefully with an American engine.
No, I'm just saying, forget the Atlas. Let's say the Atlas is gone. I'm fixing to go there with him. If the Delta IV is no longer making launches, and you've already said you can do anything it can do, is there anybody else in the marketplace that could compete with you for the mission work that it would leave?
There are international launch service providers that
Who?
could. Ariane 5 or Arianespace and the Proton launch vehicle through ILS.
And you think that they would be competing for those launches?
Well, I don't think the National Security Committee.
I don't think so either.
goes
That's my
for
point.
those.
You would have a monopoly is where I'm going with this, and I just want you to acknowledge it. You would have a monopoly on that work. But now I'm going to leave you and go back to him. If this RDA 180 problem is not solved, which I hope we're going to solve this year, you have made a statement that you may not be able to compete, and the Atlas program would go away. Is that right? So
Yes.
you've already said that the Delta IV is going away in 18. You're saying that we could lose the Atlas, but you promised you'll never let the Delta IV Heavy go away as long as the NRO needs it. Now, if those two things happen that I just described, that we lose the Delta IV and the Atlas program goes away, how much would it cost for a Delta IV heavy lift launch?
Substantially more than it costs
What does it
now.
cost now?
So a Delta IV, depending on the configuration, costs between $400 and $600 million.
What would
per
it
lift.
cost if you no longer have that other infrastructure?
Oh, it could be upwards of $1 billion.
Okay. Is that an acceptable number, do you think?
No,
Do you think that we would ever pay you that much money to launch?
I do not.
I think you are correct. Now, let me go to you. You do not have the heavy lift capability right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. We will demonstrate that later this year, the plan.
Well, let me get you on this now.
That's okay.
I
I
love
expected
this.
it.
I love your optimism, but you said in April of 2014, quote, "We will launch the Falcon Heavy from here, from this pad, early next year." We are in early next year. In fact, we're at the end of early next year. When do you think you'll be able to test that heavy Falcon lift, the Falcon Heavy lift?
So I'll try to be quick. I know.
No, we're all about you right now.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
wanna hear
appreciate
this.
that. So first of all, we did de-emphasize the Falcon Heavy development after I made that remark because we wanted to focus on the single stick or the single core Falcon 9. It was a choice that we could make, largely because the customers that we have for the Heavy were really going to start in mid-2016. So we had more time than we originally thought. We did have a contracted mission through the Air Force, the STP-2 mission, and that was originally going to fly in December of 2015. However, thankfully, my customer moved that flight out, which gave me more time to both focus on the Falcon 9 and its reliability, of which we've done a great job flying that with 100% mission success, and then I could delay the Falcon Heavy.
Yeah. Well, I just want you to understand, I'm not picking on you because Blue Origin's got all kind of optimistic promises out there, as does Aerojet. Is that the name of them, Aerojet? Rocketdyne. But here's another thing that Elon Musk said in April of 2011, quote, "First launch from our Cape Canaveral launch complex is planned for late 2013 or 14. So y'all have made statements before about having this heavy launch capability before now, and it hadn't happened yet. You said earlier today that you think you're going to have this launch later this year and be certified by 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is very optimistic. Would you agree that the certification process historically has been a 2 to 3 year process?
Actually, we started the certification process.
For the Heavy, the Falcon Heavy?
We started the certification process for Falcon 9, basically got going in April of 2014, and we're going to finish in about by June of 2015. So I believe, and by the way, the Air Force has really participated and leaned forward heavily on this, with lots of emphasis. I believe that the Heavy can be certified in 14 to 16 months.
You are optimistic. I hope you hang around for the next panel, because have you heard the Mitchell Commission? They have a much more dim view of the timeline. And I say all this for this. I'm not picking on either one of you. But I am very concerned about this possible window that we don't have heavy lift capability. I just am. We are at war right now, and as you may look around, the world's getting a lot more dangerous. We don't know what's about to happen. We have to have these NRO platforms up in the air, and we can't pay you $1 billion to do it. So we can't let that happen. And I can't wait for you to be certified on your intermediate lift launches as well as your heavy lift launches. And frankly, I hope you get another company in there competing with y'all. But I just want you to understand, from our perspective, we're going to keep some kind of heavy lift capacity until you're certified going on. That is our nation's interest. You may not like the fact that we're going to try to figure out a way to keep his Atlas launches going so that we can keep the cost down for those heavy launches, but I think it's in our nation's interest. So please hurry and get that Falcon 9 Heavy working and certified, and I will be a happy camper. Yeah, I'm fixing to go there. Last thing I want to ask, and then I'll shut up. But I tell you, I may try to arrange a meeting with Mr. Cooper, sit down with the two of y'all in a room and let's talk about some of these things where we got more time. The last thing I did want to ask, because this concerns me, and that's Ms. Shotwell, does your company oppose Defense Contract Audit Agency standards as well as providing the necessary detailed costs and pricing information to government oversight?
So we have DCAA auditors doing manufacturing audits for us right now, and we have provided the Air Force and other government customers with our costs, and our costs have been audited. Our rates have certainly been audited.
So as we go forward and you compete for government launches, you got no problem with this DCAA audits?
No, we have DCAA auditors
what
in the
I
plant
wanna
right
hear.
now.
I chair not recognize the gentleman from Tennessee for much smarter questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is actually Ms. Sanchez's. She asked me to ask it on her behalf. It's to Mr. Bruno, and it's, do you need any government funding investment for your Plan B, which is replacing the RD-180 engine for Atlas?
I do not require government funding. However, there are wise investments the government can make in reducing the technology risk of this new and advanced technology we're introducing, and I will not say no to help.
Well, new and advanced technology, but you'd basically be duplicating what you've been reselling from the Russians for 30 years.
We will, but we will be doing in a different size class with different materials in advanced and more modern manufacturing techniques.
Because they still have a 5-year license hold on the technology.
They have a 5-year license hold on the design of the RD-180, not on the fundamental technology I'm referring to, which is an oxygen-rich staged combustion process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the next panel.
I do too. Thank you all very much. This has been enlightening. I do hope you'll hang around for this next panel because it's going to be a part of this process as well. So with that, this panel is dismissed, and I call up the second panel. I'd now like to welcome our expert witnesses for the second panel. Thank you all for coming to testify today and be with us. We have the Honorable Katrina McFarland, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. Dr. William LaPlante, apparently you must not be honorable. Nobody put that in front of your name. I'm just joking. You're a very honorable man. Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. We also have General John Hyten, Commander, Air Force Space Command, and Major General Mitch Mitchell, United States Air Force retired. General Mitchell is representing himself today, but he was the chair of the Air Force Chartered Study to Risk Mitigation for the EELV program concerning U.S. reliance on the Russian RD-180 engine. I'd also like to recognize a special guest with us today. General, it's clear that you've got somebody with us that's much better than you. You married up, brother. But you brought the big guns with you. You get in trouble, I'll just ask her what the answer is. All right. All right, so Ms. McFarland, I will start with you. Your statements, entire statements will be submitted for the record. If you could take 3 minutes to kind of summarize it, and we're going to do the same thing for all of you, 3 minutes each, and then we'll get into the Q&A and hopefully some more discussion type of an environment. But anyway, Ms. McFarland, you're recognized for 3 minutes to summarize your statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the committees. I appreciate the opportunity to appear today before this subcommittee. The Department's highest priority for space launch is assured access to space. That requires 2 highly reliable engine launch systems as a fail-safe method to allow for continued access should one suffer a fleet grounding event. If we do not have an alternative launch system, all our overhead space operations that provide capabilities such as global awareness, communications, strategic missile warnings and indications, and position, navigation, and timing information are at risk. We are dependent upon assured access to space as the enabler of space operations that we rely on for national security. We can recognize, however, that the assured access to space must come at an affordable price, and that is why we intend to pursue affordability and a healthy industrial base by incentivizing innovation through an orderly transition to competition via certified new entrants. I state orderly transition as moving to competition must not occur at the reduction or expense of mission assurance. We lost sight of mission assurance in the 1990s, and that led to a string of launch failures where more than $5 billion worth of hardware and 3 national security payloads were lost. We can't afford to repeat that. When speaking of new entrants, it's important to understand that certification is a cornerstone of our mission assurance process. We have invested heavily through the Air Force in providing a means for certification to new entrants, and it appears to be paying off as our first new entrant, in this case SpaceX, according to the Air Force as the certifying authority, should be certified this year. My last emphasis will be on our commitment to end use by our providers on the Russian RD-180 engines as we pursue our competition of competitive launch services. The Air Force has been working with industry and subject matter experts since last year, early, to find an alternative solution. We're concerned about the current FY15 NDAA Section 1608 language. It may interfere with our ability to transition in an orderly and efficient manner to 2 domestically produced, affordable, and effective certified launch systems in a competition that can sustain our full launch manifest requirements. As it's written, it may result in a trade of one monopoly to another. We're committed to reintroducing competition into the EVLV program and ending the use of the RD-180 as quickly and as safely as possible. Space launch is an inherently unforgiving, high-risk endeavor, which our approach to mission assurance has effectively mitigated for over 15 years. As we move forward into a more competitive environment, we will continue to maintain our robust mission assurance standards because the cost of failure is simply too high. Thank you again for this opportunity to appear before the subcommittee, and I turn it over now to my colleague.
Thank you, Ms. McFarland. Thank you.
Recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Rogers. Thank you, Ranking Member Cooper, other members of this panel. I can just say right up front that this panel just today has already done a really important work in exposing and clarifying, I think, the challenges we have, particularly in the wrap-up there, Mr. Chairman. You got right to it. So thank you for holding this hearing. As we know, we have a lot of challenges here. You know, one word that has not yet come up, but I want to emphasize, is sequester. So if we think about everything that's ahead of us, whether we do public-private partnership, we also have the S word to deal with. So let me go ahead and just give a summary of where I think things stand, and then, in the interest of time, turn it over then to my colleague, General Hyten. Obviously, this is a hard problem. I think you just heard this in the last meeting. I'm an engineer. I like to talk about constraints, an over-constrained problem. In many ways, this is an over-constrained problem, meaning we and the situation are given more constraints that are possible to achieve the outcome. So let's talk about this. Typically, when you have a problem like this, it's usually worthwhile, I've found, to first start about the desired end state. That's actually pretty simple and easy to get everybody to agree to. The desired end state, then what you do is you say, where are we today? I think what you just heard was a pretty good summary of where we are today. I'm going to give my version of that. But those are 2 kind of the easy pieces. The next piece is the key. What's the way to get from here to there? The transition plan. That's what we're here, and that's what we're all about. And can we pull it off? So let's talk about the desired end state. We heard it. We have at least 2 independent launch vehicle families that can do the assured access to space for General Hyten's manifest. We heard that we need to do this with American propulsion and American technology. And we heard we need to do this competitively. We want competition. We want to bring the price down. That's our desired end state. Where are we today? What we just heard. Let's talk about ULA. ULA's got the Atlas V and the situation with the RD-180. We heard the risk that's there. We heard the discussion in the language. We heard Tory Bruno say a number of as low as 5. Okay? Then let's go to the next one, the Delta. We heard Tory Bruno say what we all know. which is at least 30% more expensive than the Atlas V, and we heard what he proposes to do about that, namely to shut down the line in 18 so he can make his Atlas V more competitive. Okay, and then we heard SpaceX, which any day now, any month now or week now, we're shooting for June, is going to be certified to do a lot of our manifest. And make no mistake, the national security of the United States will be improved the day SpaceX is certified. It is really, really important. But so now let's talk about a transition plan to get between where we are today to this desired end state. Well, I think what we just heard is that just talking about an engine in isolation and the government funding the engine and getting at what Congresswoman Sanchez was asking about the amount of money. No, that's the amount of money that has to be spent, let's say $1 billion, maybe plus. The question is by whom? How much of it is government? How much of it is private? We heard just in the last session, very promising from both witnesses about what private investment can do. I think if we want to spur innovation, we have a duty to the taxpayer to look at what it would be done to compete launch as a service and see what teams come forward, including how much they would do on their own and how much the government would pay. That's what's called a public-private partnership. We are moving out on that immediately right now. We're going to put a draft RFP on the street next month, to find out who's serious, what does this look like. At the same time, we're putting money, as per the legislation, against risk reduction this year to continue it on this type of engine technology, and we're going to move out. So that's the situation we're in, and that's our approach to it. But make no mistake, Mr. Chairman, you got to it near the end. We do have to ask ourselves what risk we have still doing that strategy and having all of those conditions. So at that point, I'm going to just finish my opening remarks. Again, thank you for the hearing.
Great. Thank you. General Hyten, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Cooper. Members of the committee, this really is an important subject, and I very much appreciate, as the Commander of Air Force Space Command, that you allow us to come here today and talk about this problem, because it is a risk decision that we have to figure out as we go through. So on behalf of the 38,000 men and women of Air Force Space Command deployed in 134 locations around the globe right now, I really thank you for this opportunity. So as the Commander of Space Command, I have 3 priorities for our space lift mission. The first priority, and most important, is to maintain assured access to space from at least 2 U.S. space transportation vehicle families who can reliably launch national security payloads. So in my 34 years in the Air Force, I've twice experienced periods where our military lost assured access to space. The first was in January 1986 with the loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Because the shuttle was used for military satellite launches, we not only lost the lives of 7 great Americans, but we lost our nation's access to space at the same time. That impact was significant. It caused gaps, but that was limited because space was just becoming part of our military infrastructure at the time. The second time it happened was in the late 1990s, when we had a string of launch failures caused by our lack of focus on mission assurance and basic engineering principles that culminated in the failure of 3 huge Titan IVs, one with a DSP missile warning satellite, one with a MILSTAR protected satellite communication system, and one with a national reconnaissance satellite. Each of these failures cost this nation over $1 billion, but more importantly, it denied our nation critical warfighting capabilities that would be important as we approach 9/11. Today, space is fundamental to every military operation on this planet, from humanitarian to full combat operations, and the loss of assured access to space would be extremely damaging to national security. That's why it's my highest priority, and it is the prime directive for my command. The next priority is to insert competition into the launch business. There's no doubt that new entrants have the potential to improve assured access to space as well as drive down cost. That's important, but it has to be conducted in context with assured access to space. The next priority is move as fast as we can to get away from rocket engines not built by the United States, specifically getting off the Russian RD-180 and on from the Atlas V. I fundamentally believe that every American rocket should be powered by an American engine. It's really that simple. So keeping in mind the prime directive of assured access, the production of a new engine must be in partnership with industry to ensure we have a rocket, or ideally rockets, which will be able to fly with any engine that we build. Right now, this is a concern of mine. But my biggest concern in this new competitive environment with the future, and I thought the previous panel did a great job talking about that, is what happens when, God forbid, we have a launch failure and we must shut down a rocket for a year or two. with multiple companies operating under tight margins, how does that company that experienced that launch failure stay in business without the revenue stream that you heard talked about so much from a vigorous launch campaign? Who makes the decision when we return to fly? Who makes the decision to put another billion-dollar satellite on top of that? Who makes the decision that we have to have assured access to space and there we're going to do those things? The story of ELC is actually part of that story, and I'd be glad to address that in questions. But all of these are difficult questions. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your support. Ranking Member Cooper, I thank you for support, and I look forward to your questions as we go forward.
Thank you, gentlemen. General, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the committee, thank you very much and good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss assured access to space, a critical component of national security, of our national security. I chaired the RD-180 mitigation study last March and April. I testified on Congress, provided copies of the report. I would only say that the major recommendation from that was that the nation should have the capability to have liquid hydrogen, solid rocket motors, and hydrocarbon propulsion systems available to rocket designers to optimize designs, and that's still valid today. The ELV program has been very successful. It was designed to meet the DoD national security space requirements and has done so remarkably well. The family of launch systems has met all the requirements documented in the key performance parameters of the 1998 operational requirements document. That being said, as been discussed today, the program is in the midst of a major restructure. If not properly resourced and carefully thought out, will add significant risk to assured access to space for national security, particularly launches in the 2018 to 2022 timeframe. That may not result in a competitive environment, as has been discussed earlier. Depending on the interpretation of the RD-180 restrictive language, it could actually affect the 2015 to 2017 Phase A1 procurements that the Air Force plans, because we'll be in a sole source position as early as 2016. If success-oriented schedules for the contractors and the government are not met, the 2018 ELV program will look like the following. No Delta IVs except the Delta IV Heavy at an extraordinary cost. No Atlas Vs. No certified Falcon 9 Heavy that's yet to be submitted for that certification process to begin. No next generation launch system yet. As Mr. Bruno said, it won't be on until 22 or 23. Only Falcon 9 version 1.1, which launches the lower end of the mission model, and the Delta IV Heavy would be available for national security missions. The result would be that national security flying on the Atlas V that are currently in that middle range would have to fly on a Delta IV Heavy, or they would have to wait for either NGLS or SpaceX Falcon 9 Heavy to show up. That would be an untenable situation. This potential 2018 program would result in two monopolies, one for the heavy mission, ULA, one for everything else, SpaceX. Obviously, this is not the desired end state for competition, but is certainly a plausible outcome based on the risk profiles. The only way to preserve competition and avoid this situation is to allow the use of RD-180 engines until a transition plan to new launch system is defined and adequately resourced. I recommend a plan be put in place, led by the Air Force, to do that. And I will close with a comment from a colleague of mine who said, currently, no stakeholder has a credible plan that closes. Each stakeholder has a different endgame solution, and each stakeholder's current non-closing game plan has, and then a miracle happens as the last element of their plan. And all of those miracles are different. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you. All of you made reference to the importance that we clean up the 1608 language problem. And you just heard General Mitchell made it a real sense of urgency about it. So I want to start with this. You heard earlier, we heard Mr. Bruno in the earlier panel. I guess all of you listened to the first panel. Make references to what will happen if he doesn't get a replacement engine for the RD-180 soon. Get that language cleaned up. Well, if he doesn't get a replacement engine or isn't able to use the engines that we have paid for, that could create a potential that we would only have the Delta IV Heavy for the NRO launches that are essential to our national security. Does everybody agree with that? That record show everybody said yes. All right. You heard the eternal optimism of Ms. Shotwell that she is going to have her Falcon 9 Heavy able to launch later this year and certified by 2018. Now, let me start with General Mitchell. Do you think that is a realistic timeline?
Sir, I think when you talk the Falcon 9 Heavy, it is realistic for them to start the process. The question on finishing the process has got a couple aspects to it. One is, do they get enough launches in? And that's determined by them. As they do their statement of intent, they'll say whether they're going to do 3 launches or 6 launches. There's several options. The process to go through to get certified will then take...
But before you go to the certification, let's stay on the launches. They're going to have to prove this technology.
Yes, sir.
Which is going to take some launches. You know this business. What is a realistic timeline that you think that could be done by that company?
Well, from what I understand, their manifest, they're in the process of building the Falcon 9 Heavy now, the first one. Mm-hmm. It would be at least a year, year and a half before they could launch all 3 of those, perhaps 2 years. And that's only one part of the certification.
And that's if it works.
Yes, sir. That's it.
This is
success-oriented.
Yeah, there's 27 rockets that's going to be put in there, and there's all kind of issues about whether it would work. But let's assume it works. You're saying a year to 2 years before they
get into the certification.
No, not certification.
Just the launches.
Just to prove the launches work and all the rockets go in the same direction.
Yes, sir.
Which is the desired goal. So now, 18 months from now, they've successfully proven the technology works. How long will the certification process take? Because as I understand it from you, it starts at that point.
Yes, sir.
You heard Ms. Shotwell say they've already started the certification process. I don't think you can start the certification process till you prove the technology works.
Right. So let's be clear, sir. There's some steps in this process. First, there's a statement of intent that says, I want to get this rocket certified.
Okay.
In that statement,
that's what she started.
Right. When they put that statement in, then they say how many launches they're going to do as part of that certification process. And depending on how many launches they do, depends on what depth of technical expertise you apply to look at their design. Then they do an agreement as to how that certification is going to be done. It takes some time after the statement of intent to negotiate what's the rules of engagement going to be. Then it takes typically, I would say, because it's a redo of the company, you don't have to go back and look at their quality and a lot of their manufacturing processes, but you do have to look at the product. So it probably won't take 2 years, but I would be surprised if it took less than 18 months, because a Falcon 9 Heavy is going to have to meet some very stringent requirements, the hardest one being a direct inject to geosynchronous orbit for a 14,500-pound payload that requires a 3-hour coast mission for an upper stage, and that upper stage today does not exist. So it's not just getting a Heavy, it's getting a Heavy that can perform the DoD missions. The first Heavies are going to be an experiment, the SDP-2 mission. They've got a couple of commercial launches, but none of those launches are going to be as stressful as the heaviest of the DoD requirements.
Okay, so
I don't think you're going to get a system certified until 2018 or beyond.
Okay, Ms. Shotwell believes that she will have that entire process complete by 2018. Are you saying that's doable?
They could get there by 2018 if everything is successful.
If everything's successful.
No earlier than 2018.
Is that optimistic or is it practically realistic?
I'd say it's optimistic, sir.
What do you think is a realistic timeline based on your experience with this process, which is extensive?
If they have no failures of the Falcon Heavy, then they can get there probably in 2 years, 24 months after. So
Okay,
it'd be the middle of 19.
Okay.
If they have a failure, all bets are off. It depends on what it is and what it means for the redesign and everything else.
Okay. General Hyten, you heard me talk about this new technology. And again, as I said in the previous panel, I want to see this Heavy, this Falcon 9 Heavy certified. But this is new, this whole approach of using 27 rockets. Tell me about what your thoughts are on that. How high a confidence level do you have that this new technology is going to work in the tests that Ms. Shotwell talked about will be later this year?
Well, I'll never deny the ingenuity of SpaceX to to pull something off, because what they've done in the last 4 years is really remarkable how far they've come.
Right.
So they have the ability to do that, but they're going to strap 3 Falcon 9s together, each with 9 engines on the bottom, so you'll have 27 engines on the bottom to take that heavy capability up, and then they're going to have an upper stage that they're going to have to demonstrate how to get with an upper stage coasting to GEO for a long period of time. That is a very stressful mission. They're going to have to come into us with a certification proposal.
Have they submitted an intent?
They have not submitted.
So no process has even been started yet?
Not on the Falcon 9 Heavy, no, sir. And so when they come in, they will tell us 1, 3, 9. It won't be 9 for a Heavy because you'll never get to there with 9, but probably 1 or 3, and then they're going to have to basically say, we'll submit the following data, the following design reviews, the following certification process. And if it's 1, it's a longer process. If it's only 1 launch they've done, it's a longer process than it is with 3, because we'll see more of the multiple launches that go on. So I agree with General Mitchell in terms of it's very aggressive to get to 18, but SpaceX has been amazing in their ability to deliver those capabilities. So I will not say that it's impossible, but I think 19 or 20 is a more likely solution for a Heavy capability.
Okay. Dr. LaPlante, same question. How realistic is it, do you think, we will have an alternative to the Delta IV Heavy from SpaceX demonstrated and certified? What's the most realistic timeline in your mind?
Well, I think, again, what my previous 2 colleagues said is exactly what I've been hearing for the last 2 years, is more or less what these 2 gentlemen have said. And they've also said, you know, just the challenge is success-oriented. And so the likelihood of having all the certification done in the 2018 timeframe, normally I would say that's probably lower likelihood than you would expect. But the caveat I have to make is what Joe Hyten just made. I mean, SpaceX has done remarkable things. They've done remarkable things. And so we're all in the jobs of trying, our job is not to be optimistic or pessimistic, it's to be accurate. And so I think it is an optimistic schedule. They may be able to pull it off, but you heard all the challenges. I also want to add one other thing, Mr. Chairman. If you heard General Hyten and General Mitchell talking about depends which approach they do in certification, for those just to know, we have essentially a user's guide. If you want to be a new certifier, you can go in and you can look, depending on what class of missions, which path you want to go. General Hyten just said, you could do it only with 1 launch, but then you have to do a lot of other stuff to show us. Right. On the other hand, at the other extreme, you could do a lot of launches and show us very little, because the proof is in the pudding, or go something in between. So SpaceX has to decide which approach they want to do and then put in place their statement of intent. That has not yet, at least on our side, happened.
Yeah. So I'm surprised. I thought that based on Ms. Shotwell's testimony, the certification process has already been initiated, but you say that's not the accurate.
Not formally on our side. In the case of the Falcon 9, the formal process, depending on whether it's statement of intent, we actually signed the CRADA, which was the detailed agreement between the Air Force and SpaceX for certification in June of 2013. That's the detailed plan of how we together would do this. And so that hasn't happened yet for Falcon.
Okay.
Yeah. For the current vehicle, that's a key.
Let me ask this question. If, in fact, it takes SpaceX, and I will stay on this heavy lift because that's where I'm really concerned for our national security interest, if it takes them another 2 to 3 years to successfully test this technology to the satisfaction of you that it works, and then the certification process takes 18 months, we could be looking at 20 or 21 or maybe even 22 before the final certification process could be done, if everything doesn't go perfectly. Is that an accurate statement?
Sir, I'd only add to that once it is certified, then you have to be awarded a mission, and it's about 2 years after certification before you would actually launch a mission. Because you have to integrate that payload into it. So you've got to take the end of certification, then you have to win a competition to actually fly a mission, and then you have to take about 2 years to integrate and make sure that it's going to be a mission success.
This is the last thing I'll pester y'all with until everybody else gets a chance to ask questions. Is there, in your opinion, and this is for each one of you, yes or no question, a realistic probability that we could have a window of 1 to 3 or more years where we would not have heavy launch capacity or access to space in the absence of paying $1 billion or more for a launch? under the landscape as you see it laying ahead of us. Ms. McFarland.
Chairman, since I haven't had a chance here, I will definitely jump on that. Yes, that is our gravest concern.
Is that an acceptable national security risk in your opinion?
No, sir, it is not.
Dr. LaPlante, same question.
No, not if we're going to have assured access to space with two independent lines. By definition, by policy of the country, that violates
So
that.
based on the testimony you've heard from the first panel and the witnesses here in this panel, the circumstance we're facing is not an acceptable national security risk in your opinion?
My opinion, it adds significant risk to national security, and the policy, and this is important, the policy of having two independent vehicles, if you will, and independent, as Tori Bruno and Gwen Shotwell talked about it, access to space. It does not meet that.
General Hyten, same question.
It is not acceptable risk, period.
Okay.
I would
General
only
Mitchell.
add that the Falcon 9 Heavy probably has a better chance of getting there before the NGLS, or the next generation launch system, which probably isn't going to, as Mr. Bruno said, be launching until 22 or 23. I think you'll see a Falcon 9 Heavy launch before then, but probably not before 20.
Ms. McFarland, do you believe that if we fixed this 1608 language problem, it would remedy the circumstance that you all just testified was unacceptable?
Chairman, I would be thrilled if you came and worked with us on anything that you would like to propose relative to helping us in this matter.
If the 1608 language was fixed so that we could use those additional 14 RD-180 engines, would it remedy the situation that you just all said was unacceptable?
Yes, sir.
That's all I want. Thank you very much. The Chair, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the terrific expertise of all the witnesses. I'm a little worried that in some of the chairman's questions we were like starting to borrow some trouble, and we have enough trouble already because we want to be honest about this. The greatest threat we face that threatens assured access to space is probably our own sequestration stupidity, because that's a Pentagon-wide problem, and it's up to Congress to fix that. And I'm grateful. It's my understanding that some 67 of our Republican colleagues have now signed a letter saying they will not for a budget that is below the President's request for defense spending, because we've got to at least be at the President's level, because as General Dempsey said, that's the lower ragged edge of what we absolutely have to have. So that's step one, and that's the committee's responsibility. Step two, the chairman just got at, let's correct the mistake that we probably made in the 1608 language so that all 14 of the RD-180s can be used, because that would help close this possible window of vulnerability. Okay. Then we get to more of the stuff we've been talking about in this hearing, which is we took the great words, assured access to space, and we've effectively added some other things, for good reasons. Assured affordable access to space. And competition's a way of achieving that, but it's not the only way. I'll get to that later. And then it's got to be assured, affordable American access to space, because we're not against the Europeans, but they have a rocket too. The Ariane 5 that can work for some stuff. So, but if we delve deeper into these things, we really haven't brought up the RL-10 issue, which is the single point of vulnerability that we have today, and which that's really almost prehistoric technology compared even to the RD-180. So there are a lot of issues here. But it seems to me that when the taxpayer is listening to this, they're thinking, well, competition's good, but that also could be viewed as redundancy. We're paying for extra capacity that we know we're not going to use. And in certain areas of life, you want redundancy. You want belt and suspenders. That's good. You want a seat belt and airbags. But, when I see entrepreneurs, and it's interesting now that both SpaceX and ULA are relying heavily on these remarkable individuals who essentially compete against themselves. Their motto is probably, the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer. Because already, in many ways, they've achieved what most mortals would have considered impossible. So this window of vulnerability that we may or may not be facing, and General Mitchell did an excellent job with his RD-180 mitigation report, there are ways of closing that gap. One of the ways that might be distasteful is to acknowledge that we've had 30 years to replace the RD-180, and we haven't done it yet, and buying a few more, which even in times of trouble with the Russians, they've been willing to sell us, is a way of closing that gap, and a darn affordable one. Because the business plan of ULA previously has basically been reselling Russian technology, And that's an American company? Like, whoa. Definitions get a little squishy here. So there are ways to solve this problem. So I hope some message of this hearing is not that we can't do it in America, because we can do it in America. We will do it in America. We will get this done. And oftentimes we argue over technique, and it's good to have this competition and occasional elbow. But we're a can-do country, and we will get this lift done. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned is it's my understanding that many of our satellites are being downsized, so perhaps the heavy lift capability isn't as necessary as it once was. So we've got to get with the program here, and I think that the sum total of your testimony is maybe we need to get the bureaucracy a little faster, because an automatic 2-year process, as I told one of the witnesses earlier, that was half of World War II. And now we just use that much time to, and you know, if we had to in an emergency spend $1 billion, well, what did we spend in Afghanistan and Iraq, and what exactly did we accomplish? You know, so putting things in perspective, we are a can-do, successful nation. We will get this done, and we have advantages that no other place on earth has. So the message, overall message of this, let's not borrow too much trouble from the future. This will be done, and we will figure out a way to do it. And that, to me, is one of the most encouraging things that I could take from this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lamborn of Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. And General Hyten, greetings from Colorado Springs. I know people that work for you or associated with contractors helping you, and they certainly have a lot of respect for what you're doing. So thank you so much. For any one of you, I have a question. Now, I was concerned because in a March 27th House Science Committee hearing, Garrett Reisman of SpaceX testified, quote, "With each flight, the Falcon 9 launch vehicle also continues to undergo improvements to safety, reliability, and performance," unquote. Does that mean that it is a moving target? General Hyten.
Yes, sir. So the interesting thing about launch is that pretty much every launch that we fly, doesn't matter whether it's a ULA launch, an Atlas, a Delta, whether it's a SpaceX launch, a Falcon 9, there's almost always first flight items on that launch. We continue to mature the technology. We continue to provide additional capability. We focus on that, and we have a very disciplined process for how we bring those things on. The certification process incorporates all of those things that are coming in. It's not going to be an issue for us working through that. We know how to do that kind of business. We know how to bring new capabilities on. We'll continue to do that with SpaceX, just like we've done with ULA, sir.
Would any of you add to that, or does that pretty much sum up what your thoughts are?
That is what we consider our state.
Okay. All right, thank you. And secondly, General Hyten, at a February 25th hearing at the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, the Secretary of the Air Force stated that, quote, "SpaceX has not really been part of our EELV program yet," right? They're trying to get certified to be part of that, but if you look back in time, they have had various mishaps, unquote. What was the Secretary of the Air Force getting at by that statement?
So the Secretary is pointing out, and we've had the same issues with launches, is that not every launch goes perfect. And so SpaceX has had some internal anomalies in the launches that they've done. Those are proprietary information, so I'd be glad to share the details with you in a private setting, but I don't want to share them in a public setting. But we've also had the same things with Atlas launches. We've had the same thing with Delta launches. And we go back and look at that. But the most important thing to remember is each one of those was a mission success. The actual rocket was successful as we went through. So the Secretary was talking about issues with SpaceX in terms of anomalies that they've had. We continue to pursue those anomalies. We've worked those out with SpaceX. We've also done that with ULA. That is a normal way of working in the launch business. We'll continue to do that with SpaceX. The tricky part is that you can never extrapolate them into a national security space launch, because some of our requirements are very stringent. And so when you ask the question, would the Falcon 9 have worked if you were launching this kind of rocket, it starts turning into a multidimensional helix where you just can't figure out all the variables and turn it into an answer that makes sense. But the good news is that every one of their launches have worked. It has been a mission success. We just have to work through the issues with them.
I'm just going to finish up with a very general question, just to illuminate my understanding better. What is at risk? If you take one of these heavy launches, how much time is involved in putting the bus together, and then how many dollars are involved? In a worst-case scenario, and I don't want to go into detail, and can't, on what capability we lose. That's huge also. But how much time do we lose, and how many dollars do we lose with one of these heavy launches?
You mean with a heavy launch failure?
Exactly.
Yes. Well, and as has been said by several of my colleagues here, of course, we're launching is a means to an end. The important thing is we're launching into space. That's what we actually care about. And those are at least $1 billion a pop, sometimes more. You lose the capability, as General Hyten said about what happened in the late 90s. And just remind people the type of things we're putting into space are not just communications, but it is communications. I mean, essentially, if you think of the nuclear triad we have the bombers, we have the ICBMs, and we have the submarines, the command and control of it, which we care about. But what the indications and warning of that is what we put into space. It's what we assure and have been assured the country and the president for decades, that we have a reliable deterrent system that he or she or the leadership will know if there's something happening in a timely way so they can make a decision. So this is serious, serious stuff. So you lose the money, you potentially lose the capability, and so it's a big deal. And then as General Hyten said, the company, we have to be concerned if the company's going to be run out of business, depending on the company.
And lastly, I'm running out of time. How many years are we talking about to duplicate it?
So you have to rebuild the system that you launched. And some of those systems take 5, 6, 8, 12 years.
Well, thank you so much. This is so critical. I appreciate your help.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McFarland and Dr. LaPlante, given the importance associated with the payloads we're talking about here, I think is described by General Hyten, do you agree that any future launch contracts should put a premium on full certification based on demonstrating launch success?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay.
Yes, but what I also think we need to challenge ourselves is to make sure that we're doing it as efficiently as possible. And we need to look at the process to make sure of it. But yes, I do.
General Hyten, anything?
No, the certification process this is the first time we've been through a certification process, Congressman. And so the first time you go through with something, the nature of a bureaucracy is to make sure that you have everything covered. And so we did that. When you look back in hindsight, and we've just had an independent team look back, and we'll have some reports come through the Secretary of the Air Force shortly. But when you look back, there's probably some things we can do to streamline that. That's what Dr. LaPlante's referring to. I think there's smart things we can do in the future. You always learn the first time you go through something.
General Mitchell?
Yes, that's being looked at by General Larry Welch, who is a former Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He's actually did 2 things. One for General Greaves in the certification of the 911 specifically, and then he's looking at the general overall process. I'm a part of that team that's supporting him in that look of, can we improve the process without giving up mission assurance? And General Welch is very adamant about that, because he goes back to the 1999 failures when he did the broad area review, and he's been engaged ever since then.
Ms. McFarland and Dr. LaPlante, I think that everyone can agree that competition in any industry is a healthy dynamic that drives down cost and increases value to the U.S. government. But do you also agree that the foundation of any head-to-head competition between launch providers needs to be based on fair and open competition, taking into account any government-provided resources, such as launch facilities, engineering services, or any other below-value government contribution?
Congressman, absolutely. When we go through competition in the future, we have to be very cognizant of what contributions are held where, and that actually is part of the competition process when you equate cost to cost.
Yeah, Congressman, yes, Adam Smith is correct. Competition is good, but we have to do our level best when we're doing it to make sure you look at it from every angle and make sure it's a level playing field. That's our strategy, and so we always are doing that. We have to do that.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Bridenstine for 5 minutes.
General Hyten, you gave an estimate on when you think the Falcon 9 Heavy might be certified, and you said 2017 was maybe a little, maybe optimistic, but you wouldn't bet against it necessarily?
I said 2018.
2018.
And I would not bet against SpaceX. I think anybody that's bet against SpaceX in the last few years has lost. I think they're a very inventive company that has demonstrated mission success, but the heavy missions are very, very demanding. It's a whole new level of complexity that you're adding to the problem that they haven't faced yet in the missions that they've done. So it is another step up. That's why, if you're asking me, I think that's a risky proposition to get there, but again, I would not put it past them.
So we have heard, and I think a lot of people on this panel have expressed the concern, especially the chairman, and I appreciate it, and certainly I understand it, that we have a risk as it relates to heavy launch. But we have also heard Mr. Bruno very clearly articulated that they are not going to retire the Delta IV Heavy, and we're hearing that the Falcon 9 Heavy could be certified by 2018, maybe optimistically 2019. I would think would be more, we'd be more sure of. So the reality is we're really not at risk of losing a redundant launch capability. Is that correct?
The one modification I made to the analysis as you went through would be what General Mitchell pointed out, is that once they're certified, they're 2 years away from doing a mission. Okay. So the way you look at the problem is when we look at the every category of lift that we're talking about, we're really talking about a potential gap that we have to worry about. Gap is probably not the best term. Transition is probably the best term. A transition period from 18 to 22 that we have to somehow work with Congress to figure out how we're going to transition, because when you get out to 22, it's pretty easy to understand the competitive environment at heavy, intermediate, and small lift that can be out there in 22. The challenge is, how do you transition from 18 to 22? That's what we need to work with the Congress to do.
With the heavy lift requirements of satellite communications, for example, it would seem like there's a large market here for commercial industry as well as for the military. When you think about the entire market for heavy lift, can you guys share maybe shed some light on what percentage is commercial and what percentage is military?
Yeah, I can speak to that. When you're talking the commercial satellites, you're not talking the heavy lift we're talking about. They don't need a Delta IV Heavy. They can do that with a smaller rocket. And
even to get to GEO?
Yes, sir. They go to a geotransfer orbit, and then from the geotransfer orbit, they boost themselves up to their final location.
Okay.
So the Falcon 911 can handle that. Some of the bigger ones, the Falcon 9 Heavy, but not in its, you don't have to use all of its capability.
So there's not a whole lot of opportunity to bring down the cost by relying on commercial?
No, sir. This is like the Titan IV was. We launched 41 Titan IVs. It's a very expensive rocket. It's a unique mission. It's very heavy, and the NRO payloads are the only ones that require that heavy lift capability today at the Titan or the Delta IV Heavy category. And when we did the RD-180 study, we poked at that a little bit, and we got back that requirement will be in place until at least 2030.
Okay. For Dr. LaPlante, you brought up, and I think it's perfectly appropriate, and I'd like to echo it, that the challenge that we're living under right now is born of the sequester. And if you would highlight for us, because now we're looking at passing a budget, and the budget is going to have a number, a sequester number for DOD, and then there's going to be OCO dollars. My question for you is, can you shed light for us? What are the implications for OCO dollars? Does that help you? Does that hurt you? I know the dollars are different. Can you maybe shed a little light on that?
Yeah, I'll try to, and then maybe also defer to Ms. McFarland. So in the case of this space launch issue, we have, I believe the number in the President's budget for 16 and beyond for the 5 years, somewhere a little short of $300 million. Part of that, we're going to know a lot more when we get these RFPs back, because we're going to find out what is real in public-private partnership. Of course, that $300 million is like everything else going to be under the scrutiny with the sequester, or if we end up having to increase it, if we find out that it's got to be $500 million. That's the real. Now, can that be helped by OCO? I don't know how that could be. I'm having trouble thinking of the color of money, but I'll also ask Katrina to answer.
So, Congressman, the problem is that we currently budgeted in the President's budget for a competitive launch service that was based on the use of Atlas Vs. Now you add the complexity of trying to enter in with a new launch system, the next generation launch system. And then you try to find out what the public-private venture is that you could actually afford. It was very interesting that the chairman pointed to the two industrial folks, and they came back with no real response for what is the business case. And we have to provide a business case, because indeed one of the things that you're poking at when you're trying to do a public-private venture is that you know you end up with something better than you started. Not transferring from one monopoly to another is part of that. So indeed, I believe there is a concern here in sequestration. Can we afford it? And will we be able to put the money into the system for the long term, that they see a business case that they can see money there to get for us to be able to assure space launch?
Yeah, just to add on to Ms. McFarland, an example, and this is maybe just a simple example, is do you have to guarantee a certain number of minimal launches for them to close their business case? And is there enough launches where you could have more than one person with a minimum guarantee? Things like that. You were also asking very astute questions about what's the commercial marketplace for some of this, because that's part of the business case too, right? And that is why it was very important to hear from General Mitchell, because his study, which by the way is really called the Mitchell Commission, he just is too modest to call it that, looked at the market for these things, and it's not what you might initially expect, it's particularly with the heavies.
Oh, thank you. I'm an engineer. The 2014 commercial space transportation forecast that came out has a flat line on what they anticipate the future brings in terms of commercial and NGO and government. So this business case is very interesting to us. They're all competing for the same size pie.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, so let's pretend there was a third entrant. The market, would you say that the market can't support that?
So I would say I think it's going to be interesting to see how you support two. Three would be even more challenging, because last year, as reported by Space News, there was 18 competitive commercial launches awarded. Of those 18 worldwide, of those 18, 9 were won by SpaceX and 9 were won by Arianespace. Nobody else won any. Proton's kind of grounded, they're not flying real well. And the reason it's so small is every country that has a capability vectors their satellite builders to their rocket. So there may be 50 launches worldwide, but only 18 of those are going to be competed. Last year is an example. In the document that Ms. McFarland refers to, that 50 kind of stays stable, and there's about 15 to 20 every year that's competitive. So you don't have much to split up, because Arianespace is going to win half of them typically, and their consortium will continue to subsidize them to make sure they win half of them so that they remain viable. So you're just not going to get all of that market. And so the DoD tends to be around 10 to 12 missions a year. NASA has 3 or 4 that fall in this category. And when you add them up, there just is not a target-rich environment out there to go sell rockets. And even if you get a cheap rocket, that doesn't mean more people are going to build satellites just because the launch vehicle's cheap. It's, as Mr. Bruno said, it's 10 to 15, 20% of the cost of the stack. So people aren't going to go build more satellites. They're going to do this in a business case. Now, there are some out there that are talking about blotting out the sun with small satellites. And there's a couple of investments that are going on to do that. That's the same thing we heard in 1999, and that fell apart, which led us to kind of where we are in the ELV program now. They may be successful this time, but I guess we're a little bit jaded from the first experience to say, let's go bank on all those commercial guys showing up again. So I think it's going to be difficult to support 3. It'll be a challenge just to make 2 viable.
Thank the gentleman. Just want to close up and get some things on the record. And I do want to pick up on that point, though. What you just described is what worries me. And you heard me ask Ms. Shotwell that if when the Delta IV goes offline in 2018, isn't she going to have a monopoly? And she didn't want to say it, but we all knew the answer. That worries me because of what you just described. The whole reason that ULA came into existence is Boeing and Lockheed couldn't make the business case to stay in the market. So we basically created this partnership so that the national security interests were taken care of. I love it when billionaires want to spend their own money to do cool things that help the country. But it's still a business. And it could, and you just described a very flat marketplace that either SpaceX or Blue Origin or whoever decides they want to pursue that, and then in a few years they go, you know, we're really not making any money. And we can't let this infrastructure go away because we still have national security demands. So I don't want it to look like at any time that the government is putting their finger on the scale to help anybody except the government, and that is to make sure we have the national security infrastructure in place to take care of our security. So, but having said that, I want to go back to General Hyten. You talked about the transition period. You kind of summed up in there that 2018 to 2022 period that I was kind of trying to get to in my earlier questioning about this certification process. There is that period where we could have no assured access to space, which every one of you have said for the record, or at least the 2 of you. Let me get you. Is that period acceptable to you, of not having assured access to space?
Period. We have to have it every year, every minute. That's critical to our national security.
And General Mitchell, I would say you would agree.
Yes, sir, as long as you refer to assured access to space in the policy statement that it's 2 providers, we will be able to have 1 provider. It's just going to cost more.
Yeah. And do you think we're going to give them $1 billion?
So
with sequestration, it is not an option.
I agree with you, sir. All I can say is in the Titan era, we were spending about $500 to $550 million a launch in then-year dollars, which was in the 90s. I don't know what that equates to today, but it's probably $750 million that we were spending back then to launch, and we launched 41 of them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think all of you have made it clear that not having assured access to space is not an option from our national security standpoint. Now, the thing I want to kind of, the last thing I want to touch on is this replacement to the RD-180. And this is more for the record, so I know it's late, but this is just such important stuff. My understanding is there are 2 companies that are trying to build this engine at present to replace the RD-180, Blue Origin and Aerojet. Am I correct? Is there anybody else that any of you know of that's may compete for this?
I would not refer to it as replacing the RD-180. I would refer to it
building
as
the American version.
A heavy lift, American-made engine that's an oxygen-rich stage combustion, but not really to replace the RD-180. It's not like they're going to throw it under the Atlas body.
That's not the way I understand it. I think it is supposed to be thrown under the Atlas.
No, sir. The Blue Origin is a methane engine. It can't. The tank.
You're getting ahead of me now.
Okay.
The whole point is, as you heard Mr. Bruno testify, he's about to run out of these engines. Even if we fix the 1608, there's going to have to be an American-made engine to replace that mission. Now, you're getting technical and talking about how some of these folks would not be able to build an engine that would fit, basically.
Yes, sir. You're going to have to change the
Atlas
tankage to whatever the engine is. You build the rocket around the engine. To just try and, jack up an Atlas and say, I'm going to take an RD-180 out and I'm going to put something underneath it, not going to happen.
Well, you're getting ahead of me, but let me ask this question then. Do you believe, and I'll start with you, General Mitchell, that either of those 2 companies could build an American version of a rocket engine to replace the RD-180 within the next 3 years that would be certifiable that we could use?
Not within the next 3 years.
How about the next 5 years?
I would say it's 5 to 7.
5 to 7.
And I would say that an RD-180 class engine with that kind of thrust, they could certainly do. But that's why I segregate from an RD-180 specifically, because it's an 875,000 pound thrust engine.
Right.
So when you're talking that class of engine, yes, they could build engines to do that, but then they have to build a different rocket body to take advantage of those rockets.
And do you think that limited to just those two companies?
There's nobody out there right now,
There's nobody else out there doing it.
Although SpaceX is looking at building a thing called the Raptor engine, which is a 1.5 million pound thrust, but they're they're way behind either Blue Origin or the AR-1 at this point in time. So,
and you say, in your opinion, those two companies at best we're looking at a 5 to 7 year timeline before they'd be ready to launch something.
yes, sir.
General Hyten, your opinion?
Yes, sir. And I would reference Mr. Bruno's testimony earlier where he said even with the AR-1, he's going to have to extend the tank of the first stage of the Atlas V. And with the BE-4 Blue Origin engine, he would have to basically come up with a completely new tank, much larger in diameter because of the physics. So either way you go with those engines, there's going to be a new rocket that's built around it. But I agree with the time frame.
Yeah, I agree. And the 5 to 7 year number, it's no coincidence that General Mitchell said it, because that was really the view of his commission. And almost everybody I respect in this community, the scientists and engineers, use that same time frame. And that's not, by the way, bureaucracy, although we certainly know how to do that. And it's not money. It's the engineering that it takes, and the development is driving 5 to 7 years.
I really can't add anything further, Congressman. It's definitely a challenge to.
But my question is, do you concur it's 5 to 7 year timeline?
I concur.
Okay. Now let me, and this, I promise is my last question. What I would like to see happen, and this is me, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a rocket scientist or any of that stuff, but I would like to see us put out an RFP for an American-made engine that is our version of the RD-180, to try to stay in the same technology, because while I've heard Mr. Bruno's optimism about this methane that Blue Origin's talking about, it's been talked about for decades, and nobody's been able to pull it off. Now, Jeff Bezos may be able to do it. He's a really smart guy. SpaceX may come up with an option that's different. But we know the technology, the kerosene-based technology from RD-180 works. Why? So I want to see us come up with our version of the RD-180, the American-made version, and stay within that same technology realm. My question is this: do you think that it is practical for us to put out an RFP to do what I just described and expect market competition to do that? And I would ask Ms. Farland to reply.
Well, I'll start, Chairman. The practical that you had in your question is most important. If you go back to my conversation about a public-private venture and a business case, the problem with trying to have us solicit and have an engine built means somebody has to build a rocket around it. So if I were to go out with a rocket, if I was to go out with a request for a rocket that I would ask to have someone take on as a business case to launch for us under services, that is a more practical approach.
But I see you moved away from my premise. The premise of my question is it's the American version of the RD-180, which means it would fit the Atlas V. I don't want to build another rocket. That gets us down another pig trail that I don't want to go. I want to launch what we're launching now and not build a new rocket. So is it realistic if we put out an RFP to ask for the American version of the RD-180 to be built with the same technology that would fit an Atlas V, would we get market competition from the players in the universe that you're familiar with? And I guess Dr. LaPlante wants to answer that.
I'll give it a shot on how we're thinking about it and see if this addresses your question. So you're asking essentially the question is, when do we do the down select and pick exactly, something like the RD-180 or not? And you could do that right now in how you issue the RFP, sure. Our plan, though, is not to do that. Our plan is to issue the RFP that's broader than that and get as many, as I said earlier, it's 4 people under contract. So let's see what comes in with an RD-180, like, in your words, and perhaps with an Atlas. Let's see what comes in with the AR-1. Let's see what else comes in. we'd like to get these guys under contract and see what's serious about the public-private partnership, and then evaluate the technology, get them along, and then we'll down select it. You may be going right to where we end up. It's a question of whether we restrict it now before issuing the RFP or later. Our approach is to do it later because, you know, it's funny, until you get people under contract, you kind of really don't get the real data, and you don't get to see the real designs, and you don't get to see and really test it out. And I think I believe we are responsible for the taxpayer to check that stuff out, and I don't think it's going to slow it down at all. And so that's kind of essentially our approach. But we'll be happy to engage with you further as we develop this.
General Hyten.
So I'll just echo what Dr. LaPlante said. As you look at the future and you look at where we're moving into engine technology in the future, we also have to look at the law. And the law tells us we want to preserve competition, and we do not want an engine that's only available to one provider. And so it's essential for us to comply with the law, and it also makes business sense to do it that way, is that we go out and find out what is available on the open market today. And that's got to be the first step. I think that was the intent of Congress in the Authorization Act that was passed, to make sure that we have that capability, and that's the process we're going down.
If we did what you just described, we wouldn't have competition because there's only two players in the market, Blue Origin and Aerojet, and Blue Origin is talking about a methane engine, would never fit the Delta V.
Yes, sir, and I'll just point out—
I mean the Atlas V, I'm sorry.
Right, yes, the Atlas V. The Authorization Act specifically says you can't build an engine that's only available for one provider. And so we have to make sure that we're in that. So we want to look at what Blue Origin can do. We want to look at what they can do. But eventually, we're going to have to make that decision. So what Dr. LaPlante says, I agree with completely.
Okay.
Eventually, we're going to have to make that decision.
I'm following you now. General?
I agree totally. The only thing I would say is predicting is difficult business, particularly when it's about the future.
Yeah. So. Thank you. Chair, and I recognize the ranking member for any final questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no more questions. I was just here to chaperone you.
That means give me the hook. I would close with this. We may have some, I know we have some written questions that we may need to submit to y'all for the record and not keep you any longer. And the same thing for our first panelists. Both are still here. So if we submit written questions to you, we'll get them to you within the next 10 days, and I would ask you to try to timely respond to those for the record. With that, I thank you for your participation. This hearing is adjourned. Good. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Flexible and handle the volume of lift that is currently requiring 5. And we're going to revolutionize the way people come to us to purchase launch services. We're going to introduce a standard launch offering, fixed priced, priced in advance, that customers can buy and then add to that, if they desire, standard options, also at a pre-priced. It will literally be like going to a website and building your own rocket. It will completely change the way launch services are purchased. And together with all of these changes and innovations, we will substantially reduce the price of launch from where it is today. I'd also like to say a couple of words about reliability. We enjoy an unprecedented perfect mission success record of 94 consecutive flights, all of which on time, and by the way, all of which were on or under budget. This is a record no one has yet to match, and from our perspective, when you are launching national security missions, some of which are multi-billion-dollar, one-of-a-kind assets upon which lives depend, reliability matters. And so in this environment, I am very excited about the changes in our industry. Competition is now possible. I believe competition is good for the taxpayer. I believe it is healthy for the industry, and I'm looking forward to taking that field and putting my team there because I'm confident that we can win.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. Shotwell, thanks for being here. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee today. In addition to my opening statement, I have prepared a detailed written statement which I've submitted for the record. Mr. Chairman, every day I go to work with the best and the brightest engineers, technicians, and support staff in the world, over 4,000 of them now, and I can tell you that they are prepared to support our nation's most critical launches. Those who say that U.S. engineers can't compete or that continued foreign reliance is the only way forward are wrong. The SpaceX mission from day one has been to leverage American innovation and technical know-how to provide the most reliable space launch systems in history. We seek to serve the nation by offering these systems for national security launches. To date, the SpaceX Falcon 9 launch vehicle has flown successfully 16 consecutive times for a sophisticated array of U.S. government and commercial customers, including the Air Force. I'm highly confident that the Falcon 9 will be certified for the Air Force's EELV class missions by June of this year. Later this year, we intend to fly the Falcon Heavy, which will double the lift capability of any rocket currently flying. We believe that this vehicle, which has a great commonality with the current Falcon 9, can be certified in relatively short order. The subcommittee's hearing today on assured access is timely. National policy law rightly calls for two completely independent launch systems that can lift the full spectrum of national security payloads. Due to the common upper stage engines flown between Atlas and Delta, Russian reliance, and only one heavy lift rocket, we do not have assured access today. Even without assured access, the cost of the EELV program has become unsustainable. According to the GAO, the price per EELV launch has quadrupled from $100 to nearly $400 million. But I want to focus my testimony today on what I believe to be constructive solutions to achieve assured access. First, the United States does not need more Russian engines to get national security space payloads to orbit, with the Falcon 9 and the Delta, both all-American rockets, available. The notion of a capability gap is just not true. It's noteworthy that the head of Russia's space enterprise, Dmitry Rogozin, has publicly stated that funds received from the United States for the RD-180 is free money that goes to the Russian missile program. How do we justify buying more and funding the Russian military? Second, continue to pursue a policy of assured access through genuine competition between multiple qualified providers with redundant, truly dissimilar launch vehicle systems. Third, eliminate the costly, inefficient, and ineffective launch capabilities contract to the incumbent. In the meantime, these subsidies must be accounted for if you're to have true and real competition. Finally, Congress can structure engine development efforts to maximize smart investment. Government money is best spent against unique government mission requirements that otherwise would not be developed by a commercial provider. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. As a nation, we stand on the cusp of having real competition for national security space launches. SpaceX, with our all-American Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, looks forward to contributing to the nation's assured access to space.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the Strategic Forces Subcommittee hearing on assured access to space. We'll be conducting two panels today. In the first panel, we have two expert witnesses from industry who represent our current and projected near-term providers of national security space launch in the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program. In our second panel, we have three senior government officials who have responsibilities over EELV program and one advisor to the government. Testifying on panel one is Mr. Tony Bruno, President and CEO of United Launch Alliance, and Ms. Gwen Shotwell, President and Chief Operating Officer of Space Exploration Technologies Corporation. We appreciate you both taking the time to be here today and offer your perspectives, including the challenges and opportunities related to our national security space launch activities. In this job as chairman of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, I've come to more fully appreciate the importance of our space to our country. It's one of the underpinnings of our national security. Let me provide an example. If a foreign adversary was to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile at our country, our military would rapidly detect this missile launch through our space-based infrared system satellites, and the information would be provided to our highest national command authorities to appropriately respond. Such response would almost certainly be transmitted across space-based communication satellites to combatant commanders all over the world who would order our military forces to take action, and those troops would rely on space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities and communication capabilities to perform their mission and return home safely. These are extremely important capabilities that American lives may literally depend upon. We can't have space capabilities like this without an effective launch program. This is literally rocket science. So one of my top priorities in this job is to make sure that we have assured access to space both now and in the future. We've come a long way since the late 1990s when we went through a span of 10 months and suffered 5 launch vehicle failures. Since 2006, we've benefited from an unparalleled record of success through the Air Force partnership with United Launch Alliance, with 78 successful launches in the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program. Most recently, this partnership has also brought tremendous savings to the taxpayer, $4.4 billion according to the Air Force as a result of a 36 Rocket Corps block buy contract. Now we are once again entering into a new phase for the EELV. We are transitioning to a more competitive environment. Many steps have been taken by the government, including Congress and the Department of Defense, to encourage this. Congress provided funding that was dedicated to new entrants for the 2 launches. SpaceX was awarded both of those contracts. And the Air Force has spent nearly $60 million and allocated more than 100 government employees to help certify SpaceX for the EELV program, which it may do in the near months ahead. We look forward to competition in the EELV program because that will achieve the best outcome for the benefit of our taxpayers and our warfighters. Lastly, it's extremely important that we work to transition off relying on Russian engines for national security launch purposes. The intention of the fiscal year 2015 NDAA was to provide a reasonable transition. Section 1608 language regarding prohibition of procuring Russian rocket engines included specific exceptions and waivers. We intended to allow the use of the Russian engines that we understood to be on contract through the period of time that we believed would allow for the development of a new U.S. engine. My understanding is the Department of Defense may not be interpreting it the same way. This remains an issue that we look forward to understanding better today. Regarding the development of a new engine, I understand this will take time. But I believe that our U.S. history, and I believe in our U.S. history, and I believe that once the men and women in the Department of Defense have the red tape eliminated, we can do this expediently, effectively, and efficiently. We should take the lowest risk approach that is in accordance with the terms of Section 1604 of the FY15 NDAA. Thank you again for being with us today regarding this important topic. I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize my friend and colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In view of the lateness of the hour, since this hearing was delayed almost 45 minutes due to votes, I ask unanimous consent that I insert my opening statement in the record.
Without objection. However, I have read his opening statement, and I fully concur with it. I could not have said it better. As he reminds me often, I couldn't have said it better. But having said that, now I recognize panel number 1, Mr. Bruno, Ms. Shotwell. The witnesses are asked to summarize their prepared statements. For the record, the entire statement will be submitted, but you have 5 minutes to summarize. And Mr. Bruno, we will start with you.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. I look forward to talking about the ELV program, the future of space launch, and how I am transforming the United Launch Alliance to meet this new environment. In changing our company, I've asked our team to focus on 4 basic goals. First and foremost, to substantially reduce the cost of launch. Secondly, to move expeditiously and quickly towards an American rocket engine replacement so that we may retire the venerable and advanced technology Russian RD-180. We're going to do this while maintaining our unique capability to launch the entire suite of national security space satellites, a capability that no other provider has the technical ability to perform. And then finally, we're going to do all this without losing our laser focus on mission success, something we feel also sets us apart in this marketplace. And I'd like to say a couple of words about our path to an American rocket engine. We entered into a strategic partnership with Blue Origin late last year, a company founded by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. There were a number of reasons why that engine was attractive to us from a technology point of view, but I'll admit that first and foremost in my mind was the urgency I felt to move towards an American rocket engine. The BE-4 Blue Origin engine is 3 years into its development path and offered the most expeditious track to an American engine replacement. It is a methane engine and offers novel technology and advanced manufacturing techniques that promise to substantially reduce cost. But as a person who has done rocket development for 30 years, I can tell you that it is difficult, and rocket engines are the hardest part. And the history of rocket engine development is common with the occurrence of technical challenges and those that often affect schedule. So prudence required that I have a backup plan. So we have also entered into a partnership with Aerojet Rocketdyne for their AR-1 engine with a more conventional kerosene-based fuel. You could argue that the technical risk of that approach is lower because the fuel is more common in the industry. However, that engine is 1 to 2 years behind the Blue Origin engine. And so we will continue both of these until we down select in about the 2016-2017 timeframe, when sufficient testing data has been available for us to make an informed decision. I have gone to my board of directors and asked for this to be funded privately so that we can move out smartly and do both of these activities. Now, we will place this engine underneath a next generation of launch vehicles that will continue to provide that complete support to all of the national security space satellites, to all of their intended orbits. But we will also expand our performance capability so that we are able to meet the challenges that might arise in the future as the country finds new needs to be coped with in space. I will also substantially reduce the cost of our infrastructure by streamlining our product line and streamlining our facilities and our other launch infrastructure. So today we maintain a fleet of 16 different rockets. Other providers may have a single rocket or 2 rockets. We fly 16 variants in order to cover that entire span of national security space requirements. But within that fleet of 16, there are 2 redundant systems. The Delta IV medium class is entirely redundant to the Atlas V class in terms of its performance. We have maintained these 2 systems all this time in order to satisfy the country's need for assured access, which is to say 2 independent systems, so that in the event that there might be a failure or a flaw in one system, there would still be a second system able to launch our critical national security assets. In this new environment where the policy has changed to assure access through the existence of 2 providers, I will now retire the Delta medium class of space launch vehicles when we have completed our current requirements within the manifest. And that team and that infrastructure will be consolidated into Atlas, creating considerable savings to our offerings. I will also consolidate our pads. Today we have 5 launch pads to support this work. We are going to consolidate to 2 pads, 1 in each coast. We're going to do that by bringing in innovative designs to the pads that will allow them to be mission agnostic in all Delta fleet. And I'd also like to point out that ULA has consistently reduced cost from the beginning of the formation of the company and the ELV program through today. Prior to the formation of ULA, the price of lift had risen dramatically due to the collapse of the commercial telecom industry, and the average price of lift was then, in fact, $400 million each. As we entered into our block buy, ULA had driven that cost down to more like $200 million. And of course, our goal is to eventually drive that price to 100 or below, so cutting it in half again.
Okay, before I stop, I want to go to what Ms. McFarland just described as this potential gap of time when we won't have access, particularly on the heavy lift, because I understand that SpaceX is close to being certified on these medium and intermediate range missions. but you still have a way before you test on the heavy lift. And Mr. Bruno is saying without the RD-180, he would not be able to continue to compete for the intermediate and medium range missions, which could then jeopardize his ability to maintain the Delta Heavy. Do you agree, and I'll start with you, Ms. Shotwell, do you agree that there is the potential, as outlined by Ms. McFarland, that there could be a multi-year period where we would not have assured access to space for the heavy NRO platforms?
I think it's important to note that the Atlas does not have a heavy configuration and that the heaviest NRO satellites must fly on the Delta IV Heavy, which is of the Delta line.
Exactly. And Mr. Bruno has made the statements that without the Atlas, which is his workhorse mission that needs the RD-180, he would not be able to maintain the infrastructure that supports the heavy lift Delta IV, which only lifts about once every 2 years, and would make it cost prohibitive, so it wouldn't be in the market. Now, this is his argument, not mine. Do you agree that that could create the potential that we would not have heavy lift capability for the NRO platforms for a 2 to 3 year period, or 2 to 5 year period, as Ms. McFarland from the DoD has said?
So obviously I don't understand the intricacies of the ULA business. However, I do see the Delta IV vehicle flying successfully, the Delta Heavy vehicle flying successfully. And so with a Falcon 9 single core, which is comparable to a Delta IV, and then the Falcon Heavy, which we will bring online and be certified in time for competition in 2018, then you have two completely independent, dissimilar vehicle families, both from medium lift all the way through heavy lift.
Okay. With that, thank you very much. I yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for calling this hearing, and I want to welcome witnesses from two outstanding companies. I think the taxpayer has reason to be reassured because we've come a long way toward competition, toward higher quality and better price for the taxpayer. It was heartening for me to hear Mr. Bruno's comments because I think you're talking about a very different company than ULA was even just a few years ago, as you try to transform it to a more commercial model with fixed pricing and things like that. I think competition led by SpaceX is having a very good effect. But we all are worried about the lack of assured access to space and this window of vulnerability that we may or may not be facing. And I think it's important to be aware of that risk, but not exaggerate it. You know, to my knowledge, there's not a backup for Marine One helicopter for the President or for Air Force One. They both rely on similar technologies, and it's worked pretty darn well. The ULA launch record is outstanding, as is SpaceX's. So, as I say, the taxpayer has a lot to be proud of. But as we transition toward real competition, though, a lot of ways of doing business have to change. And the ELC payment that ULA has been getting for a long time, almost $1 billion a year, that would have to go away in a truly competitive environment, wouldn't it, Mr. Bruno?
No, it doesn't go away. The capability contract is generally misunderstood, so let me clarify exactly what it is. They are costs that all providers have. The capability contract pays for pads, laboratories, day of launch operations, and the infrastructure that supports all of that. It is simply a contracting choice that the Air Force has made. Other providers receive these same costs. NASA contracts them in a single contract. The Air Force has chosen to break out into two contracts. The reason they have done that is because the current set of satellites currently on orbit that are now being replaced by the launches in the block buy are generally exceeding their design life. And so there is tremendous urgency to replace those as quickly as possible.
I'm pleased to address any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you both. Again, I know it takes a lot of time to prepare for these things, so I appreciate y'all putting the time in and being here. This is a very important subject. But let me start with a little housekeeping. Ms. Shotwell, I understand that you requested an extension to fully respond to the requirement of the disclosure of contracts with foreign governments as required under House rules. Do I have your commitment to provide the required disclosure, which is posted publicly per House rules no later than 7 days after the March hearing? To be clear, that would be the close of business on the 24th of March.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next off, quick question for both of you. Do you have any concern from your perspective with allowing this committee to have access to the terms of the recent settlement agreement regarding SpaceX lawsuit against the U.S. government?
I have no concern about the recent.
About us having access to the terms of that agreement?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. The terms of that agreement are basically governed by the court, and so we have no say whatsoever.
Well, I understand that the court's saying that it's a secret settlement. I want to know if y'all would object if the court let us see that.
I don't object. I'm sorry now.
Mr. Bruno.
We have no objection at all.
Thank you both. New topic. Ms. Shotwell, tell us why it is important to have competition for the EELV vehicle program.
Competition drives prices. Importantly, it drives quality of service as well. If you're truly competing against a real competitor, you're going to ensure that you have a quality product, you have a quality service at the best possible price.
Okay. Mr. Bruno, same question.
Competition, when it is possible, is universally good for the taxpayer, it's healthy for the industry, drives innovation, and it drives value to cost.
All right, Ms. Shotwell, how do you feel about competing against ULA? Do you think that SpaceX can win a free and fair competition with ULA?
Absolutely, I do.
Great. Mr. Bruno, how do you feel about competing against SpaceX? Do you think you can win a free and fair competition?
Absolutely.
All right. All right, so we both agree. Mr. Bruno, what is the impact of Section 1608 from the fiscal year 2015 NDA based on the most current interpretation of the DOD?
Certainly. So the most current interpretation limits us to engines that we had on hand prior to the outbreak of Crimea. The impact of that is that we will be unable to introduce the new American rocket engine before those engines are consumed. We will have no more than 5 that we are able to use beyond our existing 36-core block buy. That means there will be a capability gap between when we are out of engines on Atlas and can no longer fly Atlas and when we have the earliest opportunity to introduce an American engine.
And what will that mean for your ability to compete? Because y'all both really want to compete with each other. I just heard you say it.
Yes, we do. So the reason we're retiring the Delta IV medium class is because it is inherently 25 to 30% more expensive than the Atlas. It is not competitive in the marketplace. So without access to the Atlas rocket, we are essentially unable to compete in that time frame.
Okay. To provide another perspective, Ms. Katrina McFarland, who is testifying on the second panel today, offered the Department of Defense her view of the statement for the record. Quote, even assuming a new entrant is certified in the near term, which we expect you to be, the Department is concerned that with the loss of the Atlas V and the medium intermediate class Delta IV vehicle, we could be faced with a multi-year gap without at least 2 price competitive launch providers servicing medium to intermediate class missions. Ms. Shotwell, that's close quote. Ms. Shotwell, the Department is saying we may be faced with this multi-year gap in competition. Do you still agree that competition is important?
Yes, sir, I do, but there's many ways to achieve competition. There's also many ways to make vehicles cost-effective. When we produce more Falcon 9s, the vehicle cost decreases. If you were to increase the number of Delta vehicles that you produce every year, the price of the Delta would come down. Certainly the cost of the Delta would come down.
But do you think the Delta single can compete with SpaceX on the price?
I believe it would take work on the part of ULA, but I believe that's their job.
That's interesting. Say what? You want to respond to that?
Certainly. So today we fly Atlas about twice as often as we fly Delta. When I said a moment ago that Delta was about 25 to 30% more expensive than Atlas, that was adjusting for flying